Have you ever noticed how much of who you are isn't you? Not your voice. You learned that by listening. Not your thoughts. They're stitched from borrowed ideas. Not even your reflection. It only exists when something else looks back. We spend our lives sculpting an identity, yet every chisel mark is guided by what we are not. We avoid silence by speaking, avoid stillness by moving, avoid ourselves by becoming someone. But what if this entire identity, your preferences, your beliefs, your very sense of self, is just a reflection, not of what's inside you, but of everything that stands outside it? What if you are merely the echo of the things you've rejected, feared, or tried not to be? This is the theory that your entire existence is shaped not by who you are, but by who you aren't. And if that sit's true, then who exactly is watching you from the other side of the mirror? Stand in front of a mirror. Not just to check your hair or admire the face you've grown used to, but to really look, stay there longer than is comfortable. Let the silence stretch. Let the moment thicken. You'll notice something strange. The longer you look, the more it begins to feel like you're being watched. Not by someone else, but by you, and not quite you. A reflection, yes, but somehow independent. Like it's waiting for you to blink first. This is where the theory begins. The mirror self isn't just a flipped image. It's a metaphor for how we define ourselves, through opposition. You don't know who you are until you know who you're not. And most of what we call self is simply a collection of reactions to everything we believe we aren't. You were loud to avoid being ignored. You were kind to avoid becoming cruel. You were smart to avoid feeling stupid. Every trait, every belief, every behavior, crafted in response to its opposite. In this way, the mirror doesn't reflect your face. It reflects your fears. It's not that your personality is false. It's just that it may be reactive, built like a sculptor, carving away everything unwanted, until only a shape remains. But that shape is defined more by subtraction than addition. The you that stands before the mirror may not be a creation, but a residue, a remainder. What's left after everything you rejected has been peeled away. Think of it like this. You didn't choose most of your thoughts. You inherited them. From parents, from teachers, from the books you read, from the people you wanted to impress, and the people you wanted to avoid. You didn't wake up one day and decide who you'd be. You were slowly pulled into a mold, not through force but reflection. You liked what others praised, so you leaned toward it. You avoided what others mocked, so you leaned away. And somewhere along the way, that leaning became permanent. The distortion became identity. But what happens when the reflection becomes the only reality? What happens when you mistake the mirror for the thing being reflected? You start to believe that you are the role you've been playing. This is where the mirror self becomes dangerous, not because it's false, but because it's incomplete. It can't show you your back. It can't show you what's behind your eyes. It can only ever echo what's already visible. And yet we build entire lives on that echo. We say, "This is me," without asking what me even means, outside the framework of contrast. You say you set are kind, but kind compared to what? You say you're brave, but would you be if fear didn't exist? You say you're introverted, but is that just a reaction to a world that never let you speak? The truth is, your mirror self is only ever half the story. The part that's been shaped in reaction to the world's pressure. And yet, you live in that half. You protect it, defend it, perform it, even when you're alone, especially when you're alone. Because here sits the strange part. Even in solitude, you remain a reflection of the expectations burned into you over years of being observed. You look in the mirror, but it's not really your gaze. It's the gaze of every teacher, parent, critic, and stranger you've ever absorbed. You think you're seeing yourself, but you're seeing the edited version, the version that survives in a world of comparison. And the more you chase authenticity, the more elusive it becomes, because even your rebellion is a reflection. Even your uniqueness is curated in opposition to what you don't want to be. You aren't neutral, you're a reaction. But what if you stopped? What if you turned the mirror around? What if, instead of defining yourself by what you aren't set, you dared to ask what remains when there's nothing left to resist? The terrifying answer is, maybe nothing. Maybe the self as we know it is hollow without contrast. But maybe, just maybe, that hollow space is the only place where something real can begin. Not a reflection, not a residue, but something untouched by opposition. For now though, you're still standing in front of the mirror. Still watching your own eyes search for proof that you exist. Still waiting for the reflection to tell you who you are. But here sits the loop. You are what you see, because you see what you are. And that is exactly how the mirror wins. What if the first step to understanding who you are is realizing who you're not? Not just in the casual sense. Not the surface level, I'm not like them that we repeat in passing, hoping to sound distinct, but in the deeper, quieter layers where your identity is sculpted, not by addition, but by rejection, not by the traits you claim, but by the ones you quietly bury. You began defining yourself long before you knew what a self even was. Maybe someone called you dramatic as a child, and so you learned to mute your feelings. Maybe someone laughed when you danced, so you taught your body stillness. Maybe you were told to stop being silly, and so you became serious. Not because seriousness was you, but because silly was no longer allowed to be. These are the moments where the blueprint of identity begins, not in who you are, but in who you're forbidden to be. And every time you step closer to who you aren't, you accidentally carve a path to who you become. That's the hidden machinery. Your so-called personality might not be built on passions or callings or even choices. It may be the shadow left behind after years of dodging humiliation, guilt, rejection, and fear. The person you show to the world is often just the negative space left over from the person you decided the world wouldn't accept. So when someone asks, "Who are you?" maybe the more honest question is, "Who have you been trying not to be?" And the answer is longer than you think. Maybe you're not loud, not because quiet is your nature, but because somewhere someone made you associate volume with arrogance. Maybe you're not emotional, not because you lack depth, but because someone made emotion feel like weakness. Maybe you're not creative, not because you can't be, but because someone made you ashamed of the things you once made. So you learned to withdraw. You edited yourself like a careful manuscript, erasing the sentences that might offend the reader. Over time you forgot what was redacted, and then, in a strange twist of memory, you mistook the edited version for the original draft. But the body remembers. It remembers the laughter you stifled, the dreams you abandoned, the voices you muted before they could become real. And all of them live just beneath your surface, humming like a second self, an exiled self. That's the paradox. You are built by what you've tried not to be, and the harder you resist, the more powerful the outline becomes, because to reject something is to acknowledge it. To say, "That's not me," is to hold it close enough to define yourself against it. In this way, your identity is made of mirrors facing away from each other. You only know your direction because of what you turn your back on. You only know your shape by what you refuse to contain. But here sits the danger. The longer you define yourself by what you're not, the harder it becomes to know what you are. It's like building a house by only describing the rooms you don't want. Not a kitchen, not a hallway, not a basement. Eventually you're left standing in a blueprint of absence, surrounded by walls that don't lead anywhere. And yet, you defend those walls, fiercely, because they give you structure. They give you identity. Even if it's a cage, it's your cage. You've spent years building it, brick by brick, with every no that ever passed your lips. But you never stopped to ask, who would you be if you stopped saying no to yourself? Would you cry more? Laugh louder? Try something you sit bad at? Say something awkward without cringing for hours? Would you discover that the person you were afraid to be was the most honest version of you all along? Or would you vanish entirely because there was never a you behind all those rejections to begin with? This is the terrifying edge of the theory, that the self you protect is made of things you've pushed away. And if you were to open your arms to all that you've rejected, every awkward trait, every flawed impulse, every version of you that was once punished, then the thing you call you might dissolve. But maybe that sip's not a loss. Maybe that sip's the first real moment of freedom. To live without constantly measuring yourself against others. To speak without rehearsing who it makes you sound like. To move without asking if it fits the version you've constructed. To stop being a mirror and start being a window. But that takes more than courage. It takes unlearning, unmasking, unmaking. So here sits the question you must live inside. If you are who you aren't sit, then who is hiding underneath all that isn't allowed to be? Until you meet them, you are still just a ghost shaped by absence. Still just a shadow painted in someone else's light. Still not quite you. Try defining yourself without using a single trait. Dumb scent, Say you set or patient. Don't say you're introverted, or passionate, or loyal. Don't insist even say you stir human. Just try to describe yourself, without referring to anything you've been taught to see as you. You'll find something unsettling in that silence. A kind of absence that feels hollow but not empty, like a room where something important used to be, but no one can remember what it was. That absence isn't a mistake. It's the blueprint, because identity for most of us isn't built through presence, it's shaped through absence. Not what you are. What you been told you aren't set. What you were never allowed to be. And what's left is you. It starts early, before language, before memory. A baby cries too much. Someone frowns. A toddler explores too far. Someone scolds. A child speaks too loudly. Someone hushes. Each moment is a removal, a soft, invisible redirection. No punishment necessary, just absence. A subtle message, that part of you does not belong here. So the child adjusts, and adjusting becomes a way of surviving, and survival becomes a personality. You grow up believing you are the parts of you that didn't get erased. But what if yourself is nothing more than a collection of what was allowed to remain? What if you were a sculpture of silence, carved by absence, defined by voids? Consider how often we use contrast to define ourselves. I stim not emotional like my sister. I am not as boring as my dad. The simp not fake like those people. I am not weak like I used to be. The I in these sentences is always second-hand, always in opposition, always anchored to something outside itself, like a shadow cast not by its own light, but by something it's blocking. But how can something be real if it only exists in contrast to something else? That's the illusion of identity through absence. The belief that avoiding who you're not is the same thing as becoming who you are. It's not. It's a clever trick of the mind, a survival strategy, a necessary fiction. Because without it, you might have to admit something scarier. That maybe you don't know who you are at all. Or worse, maybe there was never a you to begin with, only the echo of everything you weren't allowed to be. And yet, this echo becomes your voice. You speak through it, love through it, suffer through it. You form relationships, make choices, even dream through this lens of absence. And like any lens, it distorts. You fear certain situations not because they're dangerous, but because they awaken a part of you you've buried. You dislike certain people not because they're wrong, but because they resemble a version of you that was never accepted. You sabotage opportunities, friendships, desires, because they threaten the fragile structure you've built around what you are not. But that structure has cracks. You feel them late at night, when the world goes quiet and no one is watching. You sense something underneath the surface, something unfinished, something undone, and no matter how much success, validation or identity you gather, that feeling remains. Because you're trying to feel whole, with only half the story. You mistaken the absences for absolutes, the edits for essence, the fragments for a full self. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Not that you lost something, but that you never got to meet the parts of you that were removed before they even arrived. The version of you that loved freely, without calculating if it made sense. The version of you that cried when it hurt, without apology. The version of you that danced badly, spoke clumsily, loved awkwardly, failed publicly, and didn't turn it into shame. That version still lingers in the silence, still waits in the gaps, still breathes in the parts of your life you've avoided. But to meet them, you'd have to step outside the version of you built through absence. You'd have to risk being everything you were told not to be. And that's not easy. Because the absence is familiar, safe. It gives you rules, boundaries, roles. It gives you something to hold when you feel lost. But maybe being lost is the first honest step. Maybe letting go of who you said, not, is the only way to find out who you might be. And maybe that discovery will be quiet, small, ordinary. Not the fireworks of a dramatic transformation, but the slow, careful rebuilding of a self that doesn't need to define itself by what it opposes. Maybe you still find that the you beneath the absence wasn't broken, wasn't missing, wasn't sent wrong, just waiting, just breathing, just becoming. And maybe that's enough. You were told who you are. Not in one moment, but in thousands. Not always in words, but in glances, silences, corrections and rules. Not by being told directly, but by being told what not to be. Don't sit cry like that. Don't sit talk so much. Don't sit be lazy, weird, loud, sensitive, selfish, quiet, proud. Don't stet. Until eventually, the word don't became a blueprint, a scaffolding, a cage, and you began to define yourself by what you avoided, not by the things you loved, but by the traits you buried. This is the theory of negation-based identity, that the self you carry is built not from affirmations but from denials. You are not you. You are the perimeter surrounding what you fear to become, a fragile shape made entirely of outlines. But a shape made only of outlines is hollow. Think of a sculpture built by carving away the wrong pieces of marble. What remains might be beautiful, yes, but only because of everything that's been discarded. Now imagine if the artist was never allowed to see the full block. What if they were told, you can only carve by knowing what not to keep? That's how most of us build our identity. We don't ask, who am I? We ask, what parts of me get me hurt? So you start to believe, I stum strong because weakness wasn't set safe. I stum quiet because loudness brought shame. I'm disciplined because spontaneity meant failure. But behind each of those declarations is a negation. You didn't grow those traits freely. You grew them like vines curling around fences. They had to twist themselves to survive. And so, over time, the you that forms is more about safety than truth, more about function than feeling, more about control than curiosity. And here's the quiet tragedy. Most people will never question it. You'll build a life from this structure of negation. You'll get a job that rewards the traits you adopted. You'll make friends who validate the version of you they're comfortable with. You'll fall in love with someone who mirrors your managed self, and everything will seem fine. Until something slips. A strange reaction. An unexpected fear. A deep dissatisfaction that has no name. And you once know why. Because everything should feel right. You followed the rules. You became who you were supposed to become. But that's just it. You became what was left after everything else was removed. You are what remains after years of pruning. And sometimes, the most essential parts of you were the first to go, not because they were wrong, but because they were unfamiliar, too wild, too soft, too much. So here sits the paradox. You have spent your entire life becoming someone, and you still don't to know who that someone is. Because if you are defined only by what you're not, then you can never truly be anything. Negation creates walls, but it does not create home. It defines boundaries, but not belonging. And you will feel that, especially in moments of transition, after loss, after change, in silence, in grief, when the roles collapse and the performances end, and you're left alone with the raw presence of being. And you'll realize you don't know how to exist without contrast. Because contrast gave you clarity. You learned to be good because you feared being bad. You learned to be smart because you feared being worthless. You learned to be independent because you feared being abandoned. But what would you be without those fears? Without the opposites? Without the labels that gave you direction? Would you still be kind if cruelty didn't exist? Would you still be humble if pride wasn't punished? Would you still be you without the things you've tried not to be? That sits the terrifying question at the heart of this theory. If your identity is built through negation, then who are you when the negations are removed? When you stop resisting, stop correcting, stop sculpting, what remains? Maybe it's nothing. Maybe you've spent so long avoiding your edges that you forgot there was ever a center. Maybe the self is not a stable thing at all, but a constantly shifting defense mechanism, a dance of avoidance. But maybe that's not failure. Maybe it's a beginning. Because the moment you realize you've been defined by negation is the moment you can begin defining yourself by intention. Not by fear, but by curiosity. Not by avoidance, but by exploration. Not by performance, but by presence. You can begin asking, what draws me in, rather than what I push away? What softens me, instead of what protects me? What feels like home, not just safety? And maybe the answers won't be immediate. Maybe they still feel awkward, strange, unfamiliar. But that's okay. Because for the first time, you won't be building yourself out of what you not. You'll be building yourself out of what you're becoming. And that version of you, unfinished, unrefined, unopposed, might be the closest you've ever come to being real. Let's try something unsettling. Close your eyes, just for a moment. Now imagine yourself in complete isolation. No friends, no family, no mirrors, no internet, no media, no voices echoing through your memory, telling you who to be. Who are you? Try to answer without comparing. Try to describe yourself without referencing what others have called you, without the labels you've been praised for, punished for, or pressed into. The silence is louder now, isn't it? Because here's the truth. The self does not emerge alone. It is shaped, bent, twisted, often unconsciously by the gaze of others. Who you are is not just a story you tell yourself. It's a response, a negotiation, a strategy of belonging built in relation to the people who watched you grow. From the moment you first felt eyes on you, you began to perform. Not out of vanity, but survival. You smiled because it made them happy. You quieted down because it made them comfortable. You succeeded because it made them proud. You hid your confusion because it made them believe you were strong. And slowly, each of these responses hardened into something we call identity. But really, it's performance residue, what's left behind when your natural self passes through years of social filtration. We become reflections of others' expectations, polished by repetition, until we no longer see the original surface beneath. You call yourself shy, but maybe you were just silenced too often. You call yourself ambitious, but maybe you were just praised for being productive. You call yourself kind, but maybe you learned kindness as a way to stay safe. The labels fit, but they're often inherited like hand-me-down clothes, slightly oversized, slightly misaligned, but worn until they feel like skin. And you don't sit to question it. Because everyone sips applauding. But applause is not the same as authenticity. In fact, sometimes the louder the applause, the further you've drifted from yourself, because applause rewards performance, not presence. And so you learn to perform joy, sadness, confidence, competence, not because you're pretending, but because you've practiced it so long you've forgotten there was ever another way. Others shape you in ways that go beyond language. Your accent, your body posture, the volume of your voice, the rhythm of your speech. These too are artifacts of reflection, shaped by mimicry, shaped by rejection, shaped by watching what the world accepts and adjusting accordingly. It starts not manipulation. It sips survival. It sips adaptation. But at what cost? Because here sips the paradox. You were told to be yourself, but you were also told in thousands of tiny ways what parts of yourself were acceptable. So you edited, curated, reduced. And now the self you call you is mostly made of echoes, of what pleased them, what avoided conflict, what earned love. Even your thoughts are shaped by voices that aren't yours. Think of how often you hear your parents' words in your mind, a teacher's tone, a friend's judgment, a stranger's comment that never left. You internalized them, made them narrators, gave them power. So now when you try to make a choice, you're not choosing freely, you're negotiating between ghosts. Would they approve? Would they laugh? Would they stay? You ask these questions in silence, and then you act, and then you call it personality. But what if that sip's not you? What if you are simply the sum total of everyone you've ever needed to be acceptable to? What if your self is a compromise, a social invention, a survival mask, a response to external conditions? You dress a certain way, not because it feels true, but because it communicates something useful. You speak a certain way, not because it's natural, but because it lands better. You move through the world with a choreography that's been handed to you, applauded, refined. And yet, when you lie in bed at night, something feels misaligned, like wearing clothes that almost fit, but itch in all the wrong places. Because deep down you suspect the truth. You didn't become this person alone. You were shaped gently, forcefully, unconsciously, by the people who surrounded you. And they were shaped by others. And so on. It's a chain of reflections stretching backward through generations. So where are you in all of this? What would happen if you stopped performing? Stopped responding? Stopped adapting? Would anyone recognize you? Would you recognize yourself? It's a frightening thought, because we depend on recognition. We rely on reflection to know we're real. But what if realness begins where recognition ends? What if the truest parts of you are the ones that don't need approval? The laugh that escapes before it sits polished. The idea that arrives before it sips marketable. The silence that holds no performance. Maybe those are the first glimpses of who you were before others began shaping you. But they sit fragile, fleeting, easily buried beneath the weight of all the roles you've played. So the question becomes, can you unshape yourself? Can you peel away the borrowed layers without collapsing completely? It's not easy, because the self that others shaped also gave you love, structure, belonging. You can sit, just discard it. But you can begin to question it. Not to destroy it, but to meet the you that's been waiting underneath it. The one who never needed to be shaped in the first place. The one who didn't come from performance, but from presence. And maybe, just maybe, that sips where you still begin to feel real again. If everything you believe yourself to be is shaped by what you are not, then perhaps the real you has never existed at all. Maybe you are not a thing in yourself, but a reaction, a ripple in the opposite direction of something else. And if that's true, then identity isn't a presence. It's a counter-presence. It's an anti-you. This theory begins with a simple observation. Every quality you claim about yourself exists only because its opposite exists too. If you call yourself honest, it's because dishonesty is possible. If you think you're strong, it's because weakness terrifies you. If you feel independent, it's because dependency threatens the version of yourself you've built. Your sense of self is always chasing its shadow. But the more you chase it, the more you realize something unsettling. The shadow moves first. It defines the direction of your run. It decides where the line is drawn. In trying not to become the opposite, you become a reflection of it. The anti-you is not your enemy. It is your architect. Think of how often your choices are guided, not by desire, but by aversion. You don't choose a career because you deeply love it, but because it's the opposite of what you feared becoming. You don't pick certain friends because they reflect your soul, but because they don't trigger the insecurities you've sworn to avoid. You don't express certain feelings, not because they're false, but because they contradict the story you've been telling yourself about who you are. In this way, the anti-you writes your autobiography, not through ink, but through erasure. We like to imagine that we are creatures of free will, carving out our lives with purpose. But most of what we do is subtraction, not creation. We subtract the possibilities that scare us. We subtract the traits that disgust us. We subtract the versions of ourselves that once embarrassed us. And when we look at what's left, we call it identity. But subtraction is still a relationship. It means the self you think you are depends entirely on the self you refuse to be. And without that self, without that mirror of opposition, you might collapse into nothing. It's like trying to define north without south, or up without down. The concept has no meaning without its opposite. Likewise, you have no shape without the anti-you, the constellation of every trait, impulse, and possibility you've denied. And here's the paradox. The more fiercely you reject the anti-you, the stronger its influence becomes, because rejection is attention, resistance is energy. Every time you say, "I am not that," you feed the very thing you're trying to erase. The shadow thickens the more you run from it. This is why people so often become the very thing they despise. The preacher who rails against sin becomes consumed by it. The parent who vows not to repeat their upbringing ends up echoing it. The rebel who defines themselves against conformity becomes trapped in a new kind of uniformity. The anti-you waits patiently in every denial. And if your life is defined entirely by not that, then you're not living authentically, you're just orbiting your opposite. But here's where the theory turns from unsettling to liberating. If the anti-you is inevitable, then perhaps the goal is not to destroy it, but to integrate it, to acknowledge that the version of you you've rejected holds clues to the parts of you that are missing. Ask yourself, why does that trait disgust you so much? Why does that label sting? Why does that memory still make you flinch? It's because the anti-you is not foreign. It's familiar. It's the part of you that was exiled long ago, the part that didn't fit the script, the part that wasn't rewarded, so you buried it beneath layers of denial and disguise. But imagine if you let it speak. Imagine if you could stand in front of every quality you despised in yourself and say, "I see you. I know why you scepter here. I don't just have to become you, but I don't just have to erase you either." That is where wholeness begins. Not in purity, but in paradox. Not in rejection, but in reconciliation. Because perhaps the truest self is not the absence of the anti-you, but the balance with it. The acceptance that you are both the saint and the sinner, the confident and the terrified, the generous and the selfish, and that none of those opposites cancel each other out. They define each other. They complete each other. Maybe authenticity isn't about choosing sides, but about holding both. Maybe growth isn't about becoming someone else, but about making peace with the one you're terrified of being. In the end, you are not the story of what you are. You are the dance between what you are and what you aren't. And the anti-you? It sips not your enemy. It's the dark outline that gives your shape meaning. Look closely at a mirror, not at what's obvious, but at what's hidden. You'll notice something subtle. The reflection doesn't only show what's there, it also shows what's missing. The light that bounces back to your eyes is shaped not just by the surface it hits, but by the spaces it skips. Absence shapes the image just as much as presence does. The same is true of you. The person you believe yourself to be is not simply a collection of traits, preferences, and memories you've gathered over time. It's also a map of everything you've lost, everything you've suppressed, everything you've refused to carry forward. The truth of you is stitched together by invisible fragments, pieces that remain in the background, silently shaping the edges of who you appear to be. These fragments are everywhere. They exist in the tiny hesitations before you speak, in the unexplained anger that flashes when someone touches a nerve, in the persistent pull toward something you say you don't care about. They hide in dreams, in slips of the tongue, in the sudden déjà vu that arrives like a ghost from a life you never lived. Each one is a fragment of you that never fully disappeared. It only slipped beneath the surface. Psychologists sometimes call this the shadow, the sum of all the qualities, impulses, and desires you reject. But the shadow is not buried deep in some unreachable cave. It's woven into your behavior. It leaks out in subtle ways. It reflects in the spaces between your choices. And if you look closely enough, you'll see its fingerprints on everything you do. Think about the moments you overreact to something trivial. The irritation that seems too big for the situation. The jealousy that surprises you. The insecurity that clings to you long after the threat is gone. These are not random glitches in your personality. They are signals, messages from invisible fragments trying to be seen. They say, I am still here. I was part of you once. You don't get to erase me so easily. The truth is, you didn't destroy those parts of yourself. You only hid them. And the more fiercely you deny them, the more creatively they find ways to surface. The self is stubborn like that. It refuses to stay confined to the image you've crafted. Sometimes those fragments reappear as projections. You see them in other people, and it frustrates you. You notice arrogance, dishonesty, laziness, fragility, and you judge it harshly. But judgment is often just recognition wearing a disguise. You're not reacting to them. You're reacting to the reflection of something you once were, or could have been inside yourself. This is why certain personalities bother you deeply, while others barely register. It's why some criticisms sting while others bounce off. It's why certain conversations leave you feeling exposed even when no one was talking about you. Your invisible fragments are being mirrored back to you, and your mind doesn't like it. The paradox is that the more you try to distance yourself from these fragments, the more power they gain. What you suppress doesn't disappear. It leaks out sideways, influencing decisions, shaping relationships, steering you toward or away from certain paths without you even realizing it. Like invisible hands on the steering wheel, they guide the direction of your life while you believe you're in control. But here's the uncomfortable truth. You are not whole without them. The self you present to the world, the curated, conscious version of you, is just a fraction of who you are. It's the part that passed inspection, the part that was deemed acceptable, but the parts you left behind are no less real. They're simply waiting in the dark corners of your psyche, reflecting themselves in subtler ways. And sometimes, they are the missing pieces you've been searching for. The courage you envy in others. It might be the bravery you buried when fear was safer. The creativity you admire. Perhaps it's the part of you that was shamed into silence. The freedom you crave. Maybe it's the wildness you locked away to appear responsible. Every reflection you chase externally might just be a fragment of you trying to come home. So how do you meet these invisible pieces again? Not by forcing them into the light. Not by fixing or purifying them, but by recognizing their presence in the mirror of your daily life. Notice the disproportionate reactions. Trace the roots of your judgments. Follow the pull of your longings. These are the breadcrumbs leading back to the pieces of yourself you've forgotten. And when you find them, don't rush to integrate them into some neat, tidy identity. Just acknowledge them. Sit with them. Let them exist without trying to control them. Over time, they'll stop haunting the edges of your reflection and start standing beside you, still messy, still uncomfortable, but undeniably yours. Because here's the final truth. You cannot be whole without your missing parts. The self is not a polished statue carved by what you keep. It's a collage, messy, contradictory, incomplete, made beautiful by the fragments you once tried to discard. And if you allow them to reflect openly, they might reveal a version of you that feels more real than anything you've ever performed. Not the you that was approved. Not the you that was safe. But the you that was always there, hidden in the mirror's invisible light. Imagine, for a moment, that everything you believe about yourself is backwards. What if your confidence isn't confidence at all, but a shield to hide how fragile you feel? Not metaphorically, literally reversed. What if your kindness isn't born of love, but of fear? Fear of being disliked, abandoned, or alone? What if your ambition isn't purpose but avoidance, an endless sprint from the stillness that terrifies you? This is the unsettling premise of the mind in reversal, that much of who you are is not the expression of some deep inner truth, but a compensation for something you don't want to face. It is the unconscious flipping of fear into identity, of lack into strength, of wounds into virtues, and the more you look for authenticity, the more you discover that it might be hiding behind its own reflection. Take confidence. Most people assume it's the opposite of insecurity, but for many, confidence is insecurity, wearing a costume. It's not that they don't feel small, it's that they feel too small, so they overcompensate, they speak louder, walk taller, achieve more. They perform confidence to make the insecurity invisible, not realizing the performance is built upon it. Kindness, too, can work in reverse. It can be genuine, yes, but it can also be an unconscious transaction. A way of ensuring you'll be liked, a strategy for avoiding conflict, a way to control how others perceive you. On the surface, it looks noble, but beneath it, there's often a hidden fear. If I stop being kind, I will stop being loved. The same is true of strength, ambition, independence, humility, nearly every trait we prize. They're not always what they seem. They are often the mind's clever ways of hiding its most fragile places. And if you look closely enough, you'll find that your so-called strengths are often shaped by the exact wounds you've been trying to outrun. The reversal goes deeper still. The mind projects outward what it cannot face inward, and the stronger the reaction, the more likely it is that something deep within you is being touched. Sometimes your dislikes are also inverted truths. The qualities you despise most in others often reveal the parts of yourself you've rejected. That arrogant person you can't stand, maybe they remind you of a confidence you were never allowed to express. That selfish friend, maybe they expose how much you've neglected your own needs. That lazy co-worker, maybe they mirror your own exhausted desire to stop pretending you're endlessly productive. Even your goals, those shining visions of your best self, can be reversals in disguise. The desire to be successful may not come from genuine curiosity or passion, but from a desperate need to prove that you're not worthless. The hunger for love may not be about connection, but about filling a void that's been echoing since childhood. Even the quest for authenticity might just be a more sophisticated way of rejecting the parts of you still refuse to accept. Because if your strength is built on fear of weakness, then it's not strength, it's fear in disguise. It's a sobering realization. If everything is reversed, then authenticity isn't about adding more layers of truth. It's about peeling back the illusions built on fear and shame. It's about asking, what am I really running from? Every time you notice a trait you're proud of. If your independence is built on fear of vulnerability, then it's not freedom, it's isolation wrapped in armor. If your humility is built on fear of arrogance, then it's not humility, it's self-erasure masquerading as virtue. And the scariest part? The reversal is so deeply woven into your psyche that you often don't even know it's happening. It feels natural, it feels right, but that's the nature of defense mechanisms. They don't announce themselves, they become you. So how do you see through the reversal? This is not about rejecting your strengths. It's about understanding their roots, because when you do, something profound happens. They stop being compulsions and start becoming choices. You no longer have to be strong. You choose to be. You no longer need to be kind. You want to be. Your actions stop being reactions. They become expressions. You start by questioning every trait you've proudly claimed, every belief you've held sacred, every label that feels essential. You ask, what wound might this be protecting? And then you listen, not with your mind, but with your body. Notice where the tension lives. Notice what memories bubble up. Notice what fears surface. The mind in reversal is not your enemy. It's a survival mechanism, one that helped you adapt to a world that once felt unsafe. But if you never examine it, you risk living your entire life as the opposite of who you truly are. And perhaps that's the real self, the one that doesn't need to be the opposite of anything, the one that exists not as a reversal, but as itself. And so, the task of self-understanding isn't just about asking, who am I? It's also about asking, what is this protecting me from? Because buried in that answer is the part of you that's been waiting to be seen, not the polished, practiced self you've built in opposition to fear, but the raw, unfiltered presence underneath it. What if the most defining parts of you are not the things that exist, but the things that don't? It's an unsettling thought, that the emptiness you feel, the questions you can't answer, the void that hums beneath your daily life, might be the most honest reflection of who you are. We tend to think of identity as a collection of things, beliefs, memories, experiences, traits. But what if it's more like an outline, shaped just as much by absence as by presence? What if the self is not a solid statue, but an echo in an empty room? This is the paradox of non-existence. It doesn't mean nothing is there. It means the shape of what's there is defined by everything that's missing. Consider your desires. Why do you want what you want? Often it's not because of what's present, but because of what's absent. You chase love because you lack it. You pursue meaning because you feel its absence gnawing at the edges of your life. You strive for recognition because invisibility terrifies you. Even the pursuit of happiness is born not from abundance, but from the echo of its opposite. Our lives orbit these absences, like planets around a void. They give direction. They create gravity. They pull us forward, even when we don't realize we're moving. But here's the strange part. Once we reach what we're chasing, the echo doesn't disappear. It just shifts. The emptiness moves. We fill one space only to discover another hollow waiting beneath it. And no matter how much we achieve, there's always a subtle background hum whispering, something's still missing. You've felt it, that quiet dissatisfaction that arrives after the promotion, after the relationship, after the goal is met. It's the echo of non-existence reminding you that identity built on filling gaps will never be complete, because the gaps themselves are not mistakes, they are the architecture. This is why we fear silence, because in silence, the echoes are loudest. It's why we drown ourselves in distraction, because the emptiness might start speaking if we stop. And it's why we cling so desperately to identities, beliefs, and narratives, because they fill the void, even if only temporarily. But what if you stopped trying to fill it? What if instead, you turned toward the emptiness and listened? You might discover that what you call missing isn't missing at all. It's fundamental. It's the blank canvas without which the painting wouldn't exist. It's the space between the notes that makes the music possible. Without the void, there's no contrast, no meaning, no self to even perceive. This isn't just philosophy. It's neuroscience too. The brain doesn't store perfect, complete memories. It stores fragments, impressions, outlines. Your sense of self isn't a continuous narrative. It's a series of echoes stitched together into a story, and in the gaps between those echoes is where the illusion of I emerges. In Buddhism, this is called shunyata, emptiness, not as a flaw, but as the foundation of reality. Everything exists only in relation to everything else. Nothing stands alone. The self is no exception. It is not an object that exists independently. It is a dynamic process, an echo arising in the space where nothing solid truly is. If this sounds unsettling, it's because we spend our lives trying to prove the opposite. We want to be somebody, not nobody. We want to be something, not nothing. But the deeper you go into the nature of consciousness, the more it begins to dissolve. The fire you're trying so hard to define is made entirely of things that come and go, thoughts, sensations, stories. Remove them all, and there's nothing left to hold on to. And yet, that nothing is the only constant. The silent space beneath everything you call you is the only part that never changes. It's the same emptiness that was there before you were born, and the same emptiness that will remain after you're gone. You are not separate from it. You are it, temporarily expressing itself as a human life. This is why identity feels unstable. It's not because you're broken or incomplete. It's because you're trying to solidify something that was never meant to be solid. You're trying to capture an echo and turn it into a monument. But echoes are not meant to be captured. They're meant to be heard, felt, and released. What would happen if you stopped trying to define yourself, and instead allowed yourself to be undefined? What would remain if you let go of every label, every memory, every belief? Maybe nothing, but maybe that nothing is the truest version of you there is. The absence you've been trying to escape might not be your enemy. It might be your origin. The silence you're afraid of might not erase you. It might reveal you. And the void you've spent your whole life filling might not be a flaw. It might be the space where reality itself begins. You are not the noise of your thoughts. You are the silence beneath them. You are not the shape in the mirror. You are the emptiness that gives the shape meaning. And once you stop fighting that, once you learn to listen to the echoes of your own non-existence, you might realize that you were never lost at all. You were just mistaking the echo for the voice. Stand in front of a mirror again. Stare at the person you see there, and start describing them, the features, the posture, the expression. Now, strip away each description one by one, and ask yourself, am I this? Am I this face? This skin? These eyes? No. They're cells, always dying, always replaced. Am I this body? This heartbeat? This breath? No. All borrowed, all temporary, all destined to dissolve. Am I these thoughts swirling in my head? No. They come and go without permission. Am I my memories? No. They shift, they blur, they lie. So what are you? Most people never ask this question honestly. They stop at the surface, clinging to roles and labels. I'm a teacher. I'm a friend. I'm ambitious. I'm kind. But every one of these identities is a costume, useful in context, meaningless in essence. Strip them away, and the illusion starts to tremble. What's left when everything you think you are is gone? The unsettling answer is, you might not be anything at all. The phrase, "you're not this," isn't a philosophical trick. It's a lens that dissolves illusions. Each time you say, "I am not this," you peel back a layer of the false self, and layer by layer, you begin to see how little of what you call you is actually yours. Take your personality. It feels deeply personal, doesn't it? Yet most of it isn't original. Your humor mimics the people who made you laugh. Your vocabulary copies the language of those around you. Your tastes were shaped by culture, your fears by childhood, your beliefs by repetition. None of it appeared from nowhere. It was installed, brick, by forces you didn't choose. Take your morality. You like to think it's yours, a conscious decision, a reflection of who you are. But most of it is inherited from parents, teachers, traditions, laws, religions. Even the parts you questioned were defined by the very systems you resisted. The rebel and the conformist are both dancing to the same rhythm. They just face opposite directions. Even your body, the thing you trust most, isn't you. You didn't design it. You don't control most of what it does. Your heart beats without asking. Your lungs breathe without deciding. Your brain lights up with thoughts you didn't plan. You inhabit this body, yes, but owning it is not the same as being it. So if you are not your body, your thoughts, your beliefs, or your personality, then who is left? This is where the mind begins to panic. It doesn't like emptiness. It wants something solid to grab onto. It wants an anchor, a noun, a definition. But the deeper you go into this inquiry, the more every definition dissolves. And in that dissolution, something strange happens. A new kind of awareness begins to emerge. Not the awareness that claims things, "I am this" or "I am that," but the awareness that simply observes. It is the silent witness behind every thought, the stillness beneath every emotion, the presence that notices everything but is itself untouched. It has no color, no shape, no name. And yet, it is the only thing that has never left you. When you were 5, your body was different, your thoughts were different, your worldview was different. When you are 80, they will all be different again. And yet, the awareness that experiences them, that fundamental I, will be the same. That's because the real you is not the content of experience, but the container, not the cloud, but the sky. And once you see this, the words, "you're not this," stop feeling nihilistic and start feeling liberating. Because if you are not your thoughts, then their chaos cannot define you. If you are not your pain, then it cannot destroy you. If you are not your failures, then they cannot diminish you. If you are not even your identity, then nothing anyone says about you, praise or insult, can ever touch what you truly are. But here's the paradox. You must lose yourself to find yourself. You must let go of every this you cling to before you can see the part of you that was never a thing in the first place. And once you do, the world begins to look different. You stop taking everything so personally. You stop clinging so desperately to roles and reputations. You stop fearing change, because you realize the real you was never changing. You were always the space in which change happened, not the thing that was changed. You're not this isn't about rejecting the world or denying your humanity. It's about recognizing that everything you thought defined you was never truly you to begin with. It's about stepping back far enough to see the illusion for what it is. A story told by memory, a costume worn by consciousness, a mask that was never your face. And behind that mask, beneath that story, before any word like I was ever spoken, there is something vast, quiet, and infinite. And that might be the closest you'll ever come to meeting yourself. Everything you believe yourself to be exists, only because something else exists to define it. The concept of up is meaningless without down. Light has no meaning without dark. And in the same way, you have no meaning without not you. Your entire identity is a creature born out of contrast. Consider how we define ourselves in daily life. I'm generous, but only because I've seen selfishness and chosen against it. I'm brave, but only because fear exists as a backdrop. I'm spiritual, but only because I've rejected materialism. None of these qualities exist in a vacuum. They exist only because their opposites do. The contrast gives them form, and without that contrast, the self as you know it begins to dissolve. This isn't a metaphor, it's a mechanism. The human mind does not understand anything in isolation. It needs difference to define. It needs opposition to outline. A word means nothing without its opposite. A value has no weight without its inverse. Your self-image, that fragile, precious story you cling to, is no different. It is carved into shape not by what it is, but by what it is not. Even the most intimate parts of identity, your tastes, beliefs, and values, are built in opposition. You dislike certain music because it clashes with your sense of who you are. You adopt certain ideologies because they define you against those who think differently. You even form relationships as mirrors of contrast, drawn to those who complement what you lack or repelled by those who reflect what you deny. But here's the catch. If everything you are is constructed from contrast, then your sense of self is never truly yours. It is not a self-generated truth. It is a reaction to something else, like a shadow that only exists because something else blocks the light. Your identity is the negative space created by everything you oppose. It's not just individuals who work this way. Societies too are built from contrast. Cultures define themselves against outsiders. Nations define themselves against rivals. Religions define themselves against disbelief. Without contrast, identity, personal or collective, loses its meaning. Think about how different you feel in different environments. At work, you're serious and efficient because you contrast with chaos. Among friends, you're playful and relaxed because you contrast with formality. Alone, you're introspective because there's nothing external to define yourself against. And in that absence, you might even feel lost. This isn't inconsistency. It's proof that identity is fluid, always sculpted by the context it exists within. And that realization is both unsettling and liberating. It's unsettling because it suggests that you might never have known yourself at all, that what you thought was you was simply the result of your positioning against the world. It's liberating because once you see this, you can stop clinging so tightly to the illusion of permanence. You can stop fighting so hard to define yourself, and instead begin to observe how your identity shifts as the contrasts around you change. It's almost as if the self requires its opposites to exist, like a painting defined as much by its negative space as by its strokes. Who you are is as much about what you reject as what you embrace, and that raises a haunting question. If the opposites vanished, if there was nothing to contrast against, would you still be you? Even your sense of morality, which many believe to be absolute, is built this way. You think you're good because you can imagine being bad. You think you're kind because you've seen cruelty. Remove the contrast, and those words lose their meaning entirely. Without cruelty, kindness is not kindness. It's just behavior. Without selfishness, generosity is not generosity. It's just action. Imagine a world without hate. Could you still define love? A life without failure. Could you still value success? This is the strange paradox. The very things you try to distance yourself from, fear, suffering, loss, weakness, are the very things that make your identity possible. Without them, the you you're protecting wouldn't exist. A universe without death, would living even mean anything? This is why identity feels unstable, because it is. It was never meant to be fixed. It sips a moving target, an ever-changing point on a scale of contrasts. And maybe the most honest thing you can say about yourself is not, I am this or I am that, but I exist between strength and fragility. So perhaps the self is not a thing to be found, but a tension to be understood. It's not a noun, it's a relationship, a delicate balancing act between opposites, and the deeper truth is this: you are not one side of the spectrum. You are the spectrum. You are the space between what you are and what you are not, and that space is constantly shifting, endlessly redefined as the world around you changes. Between certainty and doubt, between who you are and who you could have been. In that between space, there is no solid self to cling to, only the fluid dance of contrast, endlessly creating and dissolving the illusion of you. Meaning is something we chase as if it's out there, hidden in a job, a purpose, a love story, a goal. We speak about it like a treasure waiting to be discovered, as though it's a shining object buried beneath the surface of life. But what if meaning isn't a presence at all? What if it's a shadow? Something that only exists when light meets darkness, when something and nothing collide. This is the unsettling truth. Meaning cannot exist in isolation. It's born in contrast, shaped by what it is not. The word life means nothing without the shadow of death. Joy is unintelligible without sorrow. Purpose feels profound only because emptiness lurks beside it. Everything that feels meaningful is illuminated by what it isn't. We spend our lives building identities, careers, families, philosophies, believing these things are meaning, but they are merely the forms that meaning's shadow takes. What gives them weight is their opposite. A parent's love feels sacred because they know loss is possible. Success tastes sweet because failure was once a threat. Even waking up each day carries meaning because the alternative, non-existence, is always nearby, silently watching. And yet, we resist this truth. We don't like to think of meaning as a shadow. We want it to be solid, real, eternal. We want to believe that our values and beliefs stand on their own. But the deeper you look, the more you realize they do not. They only exist in relation to their negations. Remove the darkness, and the light vanishes too. This is why so many people who get everything they ever wanted still feel empty. They removed the contrast. They eliminated the tension. Once there's nothing left to push against, meaning begins to fade, like a shadow disappearing under a noon sun. It's not that the achievement was false. It's that the very thing that made it meaningful, the struggle, the uncertainty, the possibility of failure, is gone. We are creatures who need contrast to feel alive. That's why we manufacture obstacles, chase new problems, and set bigger goals. We crave the resistance that gives weight to our victories. Without it, the story collapses. The hero is meaningless without the villain. The quest is hollow without the mountain to climb. Even our sense of self is built this way. Who you are, your values, your boundaries, your priorities, all come into focus because of the shadows cast by what you reject. I believe in honesty is only meaningful because dishonesty exists. I value peace only resonates because you've seen conflict. If you'd never experienced the opposite, these ideas would carry no weight at all. But there's another layer to this paradox, one that's harder to face. Sometimes, the shadows that give meaning to our lives are the very things we try hardest to escape. The heartbreak that taught you compassion, the betrayal that taught you strength, the loneliness that made you cherish connection. These aren't detours on the road to meaning. They are the road. Without them, the meaning you cling to wouldn't exist. This is why people who try to live only in the light, chasing comfort, positivity, and happiness at all costs, often end up feeling numb. They've forgotten that shadows are not the enemy of meaning. They are its foundation. Without darkness, light has nothing to define itself against. And so, the question isn't set, how do I eliminate the shadows? The question is, how do I live with them? How do I let them give shape to the light, without letting them consume me? Because in a strange way, the shadows reveal what matters most. You don't mourn what's meaningless. You don't fear losing what you don't care about. The pain you feel points directly to the things you value. The ache itself is a map, not away from meaning, but toward it. This is why in the end, meaning is less about answers and more about awareness. It's not a destination you reach. It's the interplay between what is and what isn't, what you hold and what you long for, what you know and what you'll never understand. It's the dance between presence and absence, and the beauty is in the tension, not the resolution. So perhaps the self too is a shadow, a flickering outline cast by the light of experience against the backdrop of nothingness. And perhaps that's not something to fear, because a shadow is proof that something real stands between you and the void. It's a sign that you exist because of what you're not. Meaning will always feel incomplete, because it is incomplete, and that's precisely why it matters. It is the shape made by the contrast between what we have and what we lack, and like a shadow stretching across the ground, it points us forward, not to a final answer, but to a deeper question. And maybe the most meaningful thing you can ever say about your life is this: it was never about escaping the darkness. It was about learning how to walk in its company. We don't just remember what was, we remember what wasn't. Memory is a strange thing. It isn't a faithful recording of the past. It's a reconstruction, a story we rewrite every time we recall it. And yet, memory is the foundation of identity. Without it, there is no I. But if memory is this unreliable, then who exactly is the I it's preserving? And more importantly, what happens when memory remembers what isn't there? We think of memory as a collection of things that happened, the places we went, the people we met, the choices we made. But a deeper truth hides beneath that surface. Memory is also built from what never happened. It's shaped by absence as much as by experience. The moments that could have been but weren't. The people who left before they became part of our story. The versions of ourselves that never got to exist. Think of the relationships that ended too soon. You don't just recall the conversations you had. You remember the ones you never got to have. Think of a choice you regret. You don't just replay the path you took. You imagine the one you abandoned. Think of a childhood dream you gave up on. You don't just recall the attempts. You feel the hollow shape of the future you never built. These absences haunt us not because they're empty, but because they could have been full. They exist as shadows of alternate realities, and they leave imprints just as deep as actual events. In fact, they sometimes shape us more. Regret, after all, is not born from what happened, but from what didn't. This is the quiet power of absence. It leaves behind a memory of what was never real, and yet that memory still defines us. It influences our choices. It informs our fears. It shapes our desires. It whispers, "You could have been this," and that whisper echoes through everything we do. But what if those absences are not failures? What if they are part of the architecture of identity, the empty rooms that give shape to the house? And here's the paradox. We often mistake this memory of absence for motivation. We chase careers, relationships, experiences, not because they're what we truly want, but because they fill the ghost-shaped holes left by the past. We strive not to repeat a mistake, not to lose again, not to miss another chance. And so, our future becomes a reaction to what never happened. The self that emerges from this is haunted. It's a self defined not only by memory but by negative memory, the imprint of possibilities lost. And yet we cling to those ghosts because they feel like proof that we could have been more. They remind us that we are more than the sum of our choices, and less, all at once. Consider this: without regret, how would you know what matters? Without longing, how would you recognize love? Without missed opportunities, how would you feel the weight of the present moment? The things you didn't do are not meaningless voids. They are mirrors, reflecting the contours of who you are by showing you who you might have been. But there's danger here too. The memory of absence can become a trap. It can hold you hostage to an imagined version of life that was never meant to exist. It can freeze you in place, always measuring the present against the ghost of a different past. And the longer you live in that comparison, the less real your current life begins to feel. This is why nostalgia often hurts more than it comforts. It's not just a longing for the past. It's a mourning for the versions of yourself that never materialized. It's not just remembering what happened. It's grieving what didn't. And in that grief, there is wisdom. Because every what if teaches you something about what you value most deeply. Not by erasing the absences, but by acknowledging them. By recognizing that they too are part of your story. Not as failures, but as negative spaces that give shape to everything else. The moments that didn't happen still taught you something. The people who left still shaped the way you love. The choices you avoided still carved the path you're walking now. And once you see this, something shifts. The ghosts lose their grip. They stop being sources of regret and become silent teachers. They stop pulling you backward and start pointing you forward. Because absence isn't the opposite of life. It's part of it. It's the darkness that makes the light visible. It's the pause that makes the music meaningful. So how do you escape this haunting? You are also the shape of everything that didn't set. You are not just the sum of everything that happened to you. In the end, your memory is not a photo album of what was. It's a constellation of what was and what wasn't, and both matter. Both define you. Both are real. And perhaps the deepest truth is this. Even the empty spaces of your life are full of lessons, possibilities, and reflections. They are not wounds to be erased, but maps that lead you back to yourself. Close your eyes and imagine a painting, a landscape, maybe, or a portrait. You see the colors, the shapes, the details, but look closer. What gives the painting its form is not just the brush strokes, but the space between them, the gaps, the emptiness, the places where nothing was painted at all. Those silent spaces are not background noise. They are the invisible structure that allows everything else to exist. Reality works the same way. Your life works the same way. You work the same way. We spend our days obsessing over what's there, the people we meet, the choices we make, the things we achieve. But just beneath the surface, it's the not there that gives shape to everything. The paths we didn't take, the conversations we never had, the people we'll never know, the alternate versions of ourselves that exist only as shadows. All of this, the unseen, the unrealized, the undone, is not meaningless emptiness. It's the negative space that gives meaning to the rest of existence. The concept of negative space is a simple one in art. It's the area around and between the subject of an image, but without it the subject cannot be perceived. A figure without background is not a figure, it's chaos. A sound without silence is not sound, it's noise. And a life without what's absent is not life. It's just events, scattered and disconnected. This is why absence feels so heavy. It's not just a void, it's a presence in disguise. It shapes the edges of everything you know. The death of someone you loved shapes the meaning of love itself. The dream you never reached gives depth to the dreams you still chase. The silence between words makes the words themselves matter. Even your identity exists because of negative space. If you believe you are compassionate, it's because there is cruelty in the world to define compassion against. If you see yourself as brave, it's because fear exists as a background hum beneath your choices. Without those shadows, your traits would dissolve into meaninglessness. We resist this truth because we equate nothing with insignificance. We want to fill every space, silence every gap, explain every unknown. But it's in those gaps, those moments of uncertainty and incompletion, that reality gains its depth, like the pause in a sentence that lets the words breathe. The spaces in your life are not mistakes, they're structure. Think about the moments that shaped you most. Many of them weren't things you did, but things that didn't happen. The opportunity you missed, that taught you resilience. The heartbreak that left space for deeper love. The period of confusion that forced you to question who you were. Those negative spaces weren't failures. They were the contours of becoming. And yet, we try so hard to avoid them. We rush to fill every silence with noise, every pause with productivity, every unknown with certainty. We treat emptiness as a problem rather than a possibility. But in doing so, we flatten reality. We erase the contrast that gives life its texture. What if instead, you treated the negative space of your life as sacred? What if you saw the gaps, the unknowns, the endings, the absences, not as things to fix, but as things to listen to? You might start noticing patterns. The friendships that never formed show you what kind of connection you truly crave. The chances you didn't take reveal the fears that still guide you. The questions you still haven't answered point to the parts of yourself still waiting to be discovered. The silence that makes you uncomfortable is the very silence that might teach you who you are beneath the noise. In art, negative space is not passive. It's active. It's deliberate. It tells the eye where to look and how to understand what it sees. In the same way, the nothing in your life isn't passive either. It guides you. It shapes your choices. It creates boundaries within which meaning emerges. Here's the paradox. The more you try to erase the empty spaces, the less meaning your life will have, because without them, the story has no shape, the plot has no rhythm, the self has no definition. It's the moments of uncertainty, the pauses, the losses, the silences, the not this, that make the this real. And maybe that's the deepest truth of all. You are not only defined by what you do, but by what you don't. You are not only made of what you have, but of what you lack. You are not only the sum of your presence, but the shape carved by your absence. Reality is not a solid block of existence. It is a sculpture, and absence is the chisel. So instead of fearing the negative space, learn to see it, sit with it, let it speak. Because in those quiet, empty corners of your life, something extraordinary is always happening. The silence is building a shape. The emptiness is telling a story. And the spaces you've spent your whole life ignoring might be the only places where you can finally see yourself clearly. Every moment of your life, there is someone watching you. Not a person, not a god, not even society, but something far stranger, the version of you that exists on the other side of the mirror, the one who is not you, but without whom you could not exist. The opposite observer. This observer is not a second consciousness. It's a perspective, an unseen angle from which everything you think you are is constantly being defined. You believe you're generous because you've measured yourself against selfishness. You call yourself strong because you've witnessed weakness. You see yourself as successful because you've seen failure. The opposite observer is that silent counterpart, the one you never meet but who shapes every thought you have about who you are. This idea may sound abstract, but it's everywhere in your daily life. Every judgment you make, of others, of yourself, is the mind comparing two poles. Good exists because bad does. Beauty matters because ugliness does. You feel tall because something is shorter, important because something is less so. You cannot know one without its reflection, and that reflection is always watching, always present, always shaping the way you see. The self does not exist in isolation. It is relational. It's a mirror facing another mirror. Endless reflections looping back and forth. Even your most intimate sense of identity is tethered to this unseen counterpart. Without the contrast it provides, you would have no anchor. The die would float, undefined, meaningless. But here's the paradox. We forget this observer exists. We believe our identity is self-generated, a product of free will, unique experience, personal choice. Yet, all along, it's been a reaction to something else. Our sense of goodness depends on the existence of evil. Our sense of wisdom depends on ignorance. Our sense of individuality depends on the presence of others. And in this dance of opposites, something profound emerges. You are never just you. You are the space between you and everything you are not. Think of how you see yourself in a relationship. Alone, you may feel independent, but place yourself next to someone deeply self-sufficient, and suddenly you feel needy. Stand beside someone dependent, and you become the strong one. These aren't changes in your core, they're shifts in the frame of reference. The opposite observer changes the story you tell yourself about who you are. The same thing happens internally. You might think you're brave, until fear appears. You might think you're compassionate, until cruelty tempts you. These moments don't create your identity, they reveal it by contrast. The opposite observer isn't just out there, it's alive within you, constantly casting shadows and reflections against which the self is measured. And sometimes, it challenges you. It asks uncomfortable questions. Would you still be kind if cruelty didn't exist? Would you still be ambitious if failure weren't possible? Would you still be you if there was nothing left to compare yourself to? These questions expose an uncomfortable truth. Much of what you are is conditional. It depends on a backdrop. Remove the opposite, and the self begins to dissolve. Yet, this dissolution isn't a problem. It's a doorway, because the moment you see the opposite observer clearly, you stop mistaking the contrast for the core. You stop clinging to the illusion that you are this or that. Instead, you begin to understand yourself as a spectrum, as something fluid, defined only by the dance between extremes. Even spiritually, this idea echoes through history. Yin and yang, light and darkness, creation and destruction, the self and the shadow. Every tradition, in its own language, tells the same story. Opposites are not enemies, they are co-creators. Without one, the other cannot exist. And so the task isn't to destroy the opposite observer, it's to recognize it, to see that it's always been there, shaping you quietly, from the edges. The anger you despise, the jealousy you suppress, the selfishness you deny, they're not your enemies. They are mirrors, revealing the boundaries of what you believe you are. When you stop running from those mirrors, something miraculous happens. Compassion stops being a performance against cruelty and starts becoming a natural expression of wholeness. Confidence stops being a reaction to fear and starts arising from presence. You no longer need another to define you. You begin to exist in and of yourself. But that journey starts with awareness. It starts by noticing the opposite observer in every moment, in every judgment, in every label, in every I am that crosses your mind, and then asking, who am I in the absence of this contrast? The answer might unsettle you. It might feel like nothing, but that nothing is not emptiness. It's freedom. It's the space where the self stops being a reaction and starts becoming a reality. Because the truth is this: you are not one side of a coin. You are the coin itself, both sides, and the invisible space between them, and the opposite observer. It isn't watching from a distance. It is you in disguise. What if you have never truly been yourself? Not even once. It sounds impossible. Of course you've been yourself. You've said what you meant. You've made choices that felt authentic. You've followed your heart. But pause for a moment and look deeper. How many of those authentic choices were shaped by invisible pressures? How many of those feelings were rehearsed performances? How much of who you think you are is simply the product of everything around you? The unsettling possibility is that you have never, in the deepest sense, been you, because the you think you are has never existed independently. It's been shaped, influenced, molded, and rewritten since the moment you were born. From your first breath, you were surrounded by expectations, spoken and unspoken. They told you how to behave, what to believe, who to love, what to want. They told you what was admirable and what was shameful. They rewarded you when you complied and withdrew love when you didn't. And so you learned, long before you knew what you were doing, to sculpt yourself into something acceptable. Every natural trait was filtered through that process. Every instinct was edited. Every impulse was categorized. This one is good. This one is bad. And over time, the edited version became the only version you knew. You started calling the performance you. Even rebellion is not free from this. The teenager who rejects their parents' beliefs isn't creating identity from scratch. They're still reacting to the framework they were given. The activist who fights the system is still defined by the system's existence. The free spirit who refuses conformity still defines themselves in opposition to it. Even when you think you're being radically original, you're still playing by the rules, just flipping the board over instead of following the game. It's not just society shaping you. The people you love too sculpt you subtly. You soften parts of yourself to keep them comfortable. You amplify certain traits to earn their approval. You hide others to avoid their disappointment. And with each small adaptation, the authentic self becomes harder to locate. It's buried under layers of what others wanted from you, and what you thought you needed to be to keep them. Then there's the self you perform for yourself. We tell ourselves stories about who we are, what we're capable of, what our lives mean. But those stories are stitched together from memory, culture, language, all things that existed before you did. Even your private authenticity is shaped by forces you didn't choose. This is why so many people feel a quiet dissonance beneath the surface of their lives, a nagging sense that something is missing, that they're not quite living their own story, because they aren't. They're living a version of themselves that was built to survive, to belong, to be loved, but not necessarily to be true. And yet, we cling to that version, because the alternative, stripping away everything that isn't us, is terrifying. What would be left if we removed every expectation, every belief, every fear, every label? Would anything remain at all? Maybe not. Maybe the idea of a true self is a comforting illusion, a story we tell to give shape to the chaos. Or maybe the true self is something deeper, quieter, harder to define, not a list of traits, but the awareness beneath them, not a role, but the space where roles appear and disappear. This is why many spiritual traditions speak not of finding yourself, but of losing yourself, peeling away layer after layer until nothing is left but presence. A self that is not constructed, not reactive, not shaped, but simply is. The process is uncomfortable. It means questioning everything you've accepted about yourself. It means asking hard questions. Do I believe this because it's true or because I was taught to? Do I act this way because I want to or because I'm afraid not to? Do I even like the person I've become, or have I just grown used to them? It also means learning to sit with the possibility that there might not be a fixed me waiting to be uncovered, that the self is not a treasure buried beneath the rubble, but the empty space that remains when the rubble is cleared away. And yet, there's freedom in that, because if you've never truly been yourself, then you're not bound by who you've been. You can reinvent, You can shed, you can dissolve, you can step into a version of you that isn't shaped by expectation, or you can stop needing a version at all. Maybe authenticity isn't about discovering something hidden. Maybe it's about letting go of everything that was never yours to begin with. Maybe it's about realizing that being yourself isn't a goal, it's a practice. A daily act of noticing what's real and what's performance. A choice to stop clinging to the mask and allow the space beneath it to breathe. And perhaps, just perhaps, the reason you've never truly been yourself is because the self you're trying to be has never been real. From the moment you were old enough to understand language, you were given a part to play. It wasn't handed to you explicitly. No one said, "Here is your role." It was subtler than that. It came in the form of smiles when you behaved a certain way, frowns when you didn't. It came in praise for fitting the script, and silence for stepping outside of it. Slowly, without even realizing it, you began to play a character, and over time, you mistook the character for yourself. This is the illusion of role, the idea that who you are is the part you perform. Every identity you've ever worn, student, friend, worker, sibling, parent, rebel, believer, outsider, is a role. Each one comes with expectations, how to speak, how to feel, how to behave. And while these roles are not inherently false, they are not inherently you either. They are costumes stitched from context, language, and circumstance, masks you wear to navigate a world that needs categories more than it needs authenticity. The problem isn't the roles themselves. They are necessary. Without them, society would crumble into chaos. The issue arises when you begin to believe the role is all there is, when you forget you were the actor before you became the character. Think about how many times you've changed roles in your life, and how seamlessly you slipped into them. You behave differently with your parents than with your friends. You speak differently at work than you do when you're alone. You present a polished version of yourself online, a more vulnerable one in private, and a carefully measured one with strangers. None of these versions are fake, and yet none of them are entirely real. They are all fragments, partial reflections of the self, edited and reshaped to fit the stage you're standing on. And yet, we cling to these roles as if they are sacred. We say things like, "I am a teacher," or "I am a mother," or "I am an artist," as if those labels capture the totality of our existence. But roles are only ever temporary. They rise and fall with circumstance. They expand and contract with time, and the self that clings too tightly to them risks being shattered when the curtain inevitably falls. This is why so many people feel lost when a role ends. The retiree who no longer knows who they are without their job. The parent who struggles to find meaning once their children are grown. The partner who feels incomplete after a breakup. It's not that they've lost themselves. It's that they'd mistaken the role for the self. They built their entire identity on a part they were never meant to play forever. Even the roles we choose consciously can become cages. I'm the strong one. I'm the reliable one. I'm the funny one. These labels, repeated often enough, become obligations. We start to perform them, even when they no longer serve us, because stepping out of character feels like betrayal of others or of ourselves. We forget that the role is supposed to serve us, not the other way around. But here's the paradox. While roles can trap us, they can also reveal us. Each one shows us a different facet of who we are. Each one is a lens, not the truth, but a way of seeing. And if we can learn to wear them lightly without mistaking them for the whole, they can help us glimpse the self that exists beneath them all. That self is harder to define. It doesn't speak in titles or identities. It isn't bound by scripts. It's the consciousness that flows through every role but is limited by none. It's the silence between the lines, the awareness that watches the performance unfold without confusing itself for the actor on stage. To find it, you have to start noticing the moments when you're performing. The times when you're saying what's expected instead of what's true. The times when you're holding back a feeling because it doesn't fit your character. The times when you feel a quiet dissonance, as if a deeper part of you is watching, whispering, "This isn't quite me." That whisper is the real self, not the role, but the one playing it. And here's the liberating truth. You don't have to stop playing roles to find yourself. You just have to stop believing that the role is the whole story. You can be a teacher without reducing yourself to that identity. You can be a parent without letting it erase every other part of you. You can be strong without pretending you're never weak. The stage will change. The costumes will change. The roles will change. But the actor remains. The awareness remains. And once you know that, you can step on and off the stage as often as you like, playing your parts fully, deeply, beautifully, without ever losing sight of the one who was there before the curtain rose, and who will remain long after it falls. Because you are not the character. You are the consciousness that gives the character life. If you were to gather up every part of yourself you've ever rejected, every impulse, every flaw, every mistake, every uncomfortable truth, and lay them all out in front of you, what would you see? A stranger, a monster, or maybe the most honest version of yourself you've never dared to meet? We spend most of our lives building an identity not from what we embrace, but from what we exile. We decide who we are by deciding who we are not. We push away the traits that feel shameful, the desires that feel dangerous, the memories that feel too painful. We build walls inside our own psyche, hiding parts of ourselves in the dark corners and locking the doors behind them. And then, with exquisite irony, we call what's left behind me. But the self is never just what remains. It is also what has been rejected. Think of all the things you've been told you shouldn't be. Too loud, too emotional, too sensitive, too needy, too selfish, too ambitious, too different. You took those labels and treated them like warnings, and every time you heard them, you shaved a little more off the edges of yourself, until the shape that remained fit into the narrow mold the world would accept. Now think of the parts of you rejected without anyone telling you to. The anger you were afraid to express, the envy you didn't want to admit, the vulnerability you learned to bury, the dreams you convinced yourself were unrealistic. These were not enemies, they were signals. But instead of listening, you silenced them. And in doing so, you silenced parts of your humanity. The paradox is that these rejected parts never really go away. They wait, they linger, they find back doors into your life. They appear as projections, qualities you despise in others because you can't face them in yourself. They emerge as impulses you don't understand. Sudden anger, irrational jealousy, inexplicable longing. They haunt your choices, influence your relationships, shape your fears. Carl Jung called this hidden dimension the shadow. But the shadow is not evil. It is not darkness. It is simply the parts of you that never got permission to exist. And until you turn toward them, they will keep trying to speak through every crack they can find. Ask yourself, why do certain people irritate you so much? Why do some insults cut deeper than others? Why do you react so strongly to specific situations? It's often because they're reflecting something you've buried. It's not them you're reacting to. It's the part of you they've awakened. This is the uncomfortable truth. The things we reject most fiercely in others are often the things we've rejected most violently in ourselves. And yet, those are the very parts of us we need to reclaim if we want to feel whole, because every piece of yourself you've denied still belongs to you. Every impulse you've repressed still holds wisdom. Every emotion you've numbed still carries a message. When you exile parts of yourself, you don't just lose them, you lose the strength, creativity, and depth they contain. Your anger, when integrated, becomes power. Your envy, when understood, becomes inspiration. Your fear, when faced, becomes awareness. Your selfishness, when balanced, becomes self-respect. But to reclaim them, you must first stop pretending they aren't there. You must be willing to sit in the uncomfortable space where your ideals and your reality collide. You must be willing to say, yes, this too is me. Not to justify destructive behavior, but to understand it, to learn from it, to stop letting it control you from the shadows. This is not easy work. It's far simpler to maintain the illusion of a good self, tidy, polished, curated. But a curated self is a fragile one. It cracks under pressure. It fractures when life doesn't cooperate. A whole self, one that includes the rejected parts, is resilient. It bends. It adapts. It holds complexity without breaking. And here's the paradoxical gift. Once you stop projecting parts of yourself, you stop projecting them in others. The patience you extend inward becomes compassion outward. The forgiveness you give yourself becomes understanding for the world. Integration inside becomes connection outside. So gather up the fragments. Look at them, the shameful, the ugly, the embarrassing, the raw. Say to them, I see you. I know you've been trying to protect me. I know you've been carrying messages I didn't want to hear, and I'm ready to listen now. Because the truth is, you cannot become whole by clinging only to what is light and lovely. You cannot discover who you are by ignoring who you are not. And you cannot love yourself if half of you is still locked in the dark. Everything you've rejected is still part of you, And until you make peace with it, you will always feel like something is missing, because something is. You are not just the curated self you show to the world. You are also the shadow that lingers behind it. And when you stop running from that shadow, you may find that it is not darkness at all, but the key to finally seeing yourself in full. To understand yourself, it's often more revealing to look not at what you've chosen to include, but at what you've chosen to exclude. Who you are is built just as much by what you've left out as by what you've embraced. And if you trace the shape of your life carefully enough, you'll notice that its structure is defined not by presence but by absence, like a sculpture carved not by adding clay but by chipping away at the stone. We like to believe we build ourselves. We think of identity as a collection of experiences, beliefs and values we've gathered over time. But the truth is far more complex. The self is not constructed solely by addition, it is sculpted by subtraction. Every time you say no to something, you're shaping who you are. Every time you reject an idea, abandon a path, or deny a part of yourself, you're carving away at the block of potential that you were born with. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, a you emerges from the pieces that remain. Some exclusions are conscious. You chose not to pursue that career. You decided not to stay in that relationship. You refused to believe that ideology. Others happen beneath your awareness. You never learned to express anger because you were punished for it. You never explored certain desires because they were labeled shameful. You never developed particular traits because they didn't fit the story others told about you. Each exclusion narrows the field of possibility, shaping the path you walk and the person you become. And while this is natural, even necessary, it comes with a hidden cost. For every version of you that is born, countless other versions die. Think about it. For every decision you've made, there's a shadow decision you didn't. For every path you followed, there's a dozen you left behind. You are not just the sum of your choices. You are also the absence of every choice you didn't make. The life you're living is built on the graves of 1,000 lives you could have lived instead. And yet, we rarely consider these absences. We rarely pause to ask how they've shaped us. But they have. They always have. The things you exclude define the boundaries of your identity. They set the stage for everything that remains. This is why exclusion often feels like safety. It gives us a sense of control. By rejecting what doesn't belong, we build walls that make the self feel solid, but those same walls can become prisons. Over time, the exclusions that once protected you start to confine you. They keep you from exploring new possibilities. They prevent you from evolving. They make you believe the shape you carved is the only shape you can ever be. This is especially true of the parts of yourself you've excluded. Maybe you decided long ago that you're not creative, not brave, not lovable, not worthy. And because you believed it, you stopped acting as if you could be. You excluded those possibilities so thoroughly that they stopped knocking. But they didn't disappear. They remained, dormant, waiting, still possible. It's also true on a collective scale. Cultures too define themselves by exclusion, by drawing boundaries between us and them, right and wrong, normal and abnormal. And just like individuals, societies become trapped by their own definitions. They forget that what they've excluded is often as important and as revealing as what they've included. So, what happens if you look closely at what you've left out? What happens if you turn toward the voids in your life, the traits you suppressed, the dreams you abandoned, the paths you never walked, and ask why they were excluded in the first place? Sometimes, the answer will be obvious. They were harmful, incompatible, irrelevant. But sometimes, the answer will sting. They were excluded not because they didn't belong, but because you were afraid. Afraid of failure. Afraid of judgment. Afraid of what it might mean to step outside the version of yourself the world expects. And here's the liberating truth. Exclusion is not destiny. Just because you've closed a door, doesn't mean you can't open it again. Just because you carved away a part of yourself, doesn't mean it's lost forever. The self is not a finished sculpture. It is a living, breathing work in progress. And every piece you once discarded is still waiting, still available, still part of you. So maybe it's worth asking, what did I leave behind that still calls to me? What did I reject that I now wish to reclaim? What did I exclude because I thought it didn't fit, but now realize it was always mine? You might discover that the missing pieces of your identity were never truly missing. They were simply exiled. And you might find that wholeness is not about adding more to your life, but about welcoming back the things you once pushed away. Because in the end, you are not just what you've chosen. You are also everything you sit to have excluded. And if you're brave enough to turn toward what you left behind, you may discover that it was never separate from you at all. Look into a mirror and stare long enough, and you'll begin to notice something strange. The reflection isn't quite you. It mimics your movements. It copies your gestures, but it is always a split second behind. It's not the source, it's the echo. And yet, most of your life, you've believed the echo was the thing itself. This is the nature of the phantom reflection. The version of yourself you believe is real, but is in fact only a delayed, distorted copy of something deeper. It is the persona you present to the world, the story you tell yourself about who you are, the image you polish and protect. It's the you you've built carefully over the years, and the one you defend fiercely when someone questions it. But here's the paradox. That version of you doesn't exist in the present. It's always one step removed. It's a memory of who you were a moment ago, not the consciousness that's alive right now. This is why identity often feels like chasing a moving target. The moment you try to define yourself, the definition is already outdated. You say, I am this, but by the time you finish the sentence, you've already changed. Every experience, every thought, every heartbeat reshapes you slightly. And yet, you keep clinging to the phantom, as if holding onto it will freeze the chaos and give you something solid to stand on. The problem is that this phantom becomes more than just a reflection. It becomes a prison, because once you believe you are the image, you start living to protect it. You start filtering your behavior to match it. You start rejecting anything that doesn't fit the story you're telling. And slowly, without realizing it, you stop living and start performing. You perform success, even when you feel like a failure. You perform confidence, even when you're terrified. You perform happiness, even when you're breaking inside. And the longer the performance continues, the harder it becomes to tell where the act ends and the reality begins. The phantom reflection thrives on external validation. It feeds on the gaze of others. It needs applause, recognition, agreement, anything to confirm that the image you've built still holds together. But here's the tragedy. Even when you get that validation, it never feels like enough, because deep down a part of you knows the truth. They're not seeing you, they're seeing the phantom, and the more they love the phantom, the more invisible you feel. This is why compliments often feel hollow, why success doesn't always bring peace, why even love can sometimes feel distant, because all those things are touching a version of you that isn't fully real, a ghost built from expectations, roles, and memories. But the phantom isn't malicious. It's not your enemy. It was created to protect you, to help you belong, to help you survive, to give shape to a chaotic world. Without it, you might not have made it this far. The danger lies only in forgetting that it's a construction. When you mistake the reflection for the source, you lose access to the part of you that's still alive, still fluid, still becoming. So how do you break the spell of the phantom? You start by noticing when you start living for the. You believe the thoughts in your head belong to you. You believe the inner voice narrating your story is your own, that it rises from some private well of consciousness, untouched by the outside world. But if you listen carefully, not just to the words but to their tone, their rhythm, their intent, you may notice something unsettling. That voice is crowded. It is not one voice at all. It is a chorus. Your mother's warnings whisper beneath your hesitation. Your teacher's praise shapes the way you define success. Your culture's expectations bend your desires before they're even spoken. Your society's judgments echo every time you question who you are. Piece by piece, these external influences stitch themselves together and masquerade as you. And before you realize it, the thoughts behind your eyes, the very ones you trust to define your identity, are not entirely yours. They're borrowed, inherited, conditioned. This is not a flaw. It's how the self is built. From the moment you learn language, you begin absorbing the patterns of the people around you. Their beliefs become the scaffolding for your own. Their fears teach you where danger lies. Their desires show you what's worth pursuing. Without them, you would have no framework at all. The I you think you are is in part a reflection of the they who shaped you. But this realization raises an uncomfortable question. How much of who you are is truly yours? How many of your choices are simply scripts you were given long before you knew you had a choice? You pursue a career, but is it because you want it, or because someone once told you it was respectable? You crave approval, but is it because you genuinely seek connection, or because a long-forgotten authority figure taught you love must be earned? Most people never question these inherited voices. They mistake them for authenticity because they've been repeating them for so long. But repetition does not equal truth. The fact that a belief feels familiar does not mean it is yours. It may be the residue of someone else's life, someone else's fear, someone else's limitation, still echoing inside your mind. This is why so many people feel conflicted, without understanding why. It's why part of you wants to take risks while another part clings to safety. Why part of you longs for freedom, while another fears disapproval. These aren't contradictions. They're competing voices. Some are yours, most are not. And yet, there's something liberating about seeing this clearly, because once you realize that not every thought in your head is yours, you gain the power to choose which ones stay. You can question them, test them, challenge them. You can say, this voice is my father's fear, not mine. This doubt is my culture's story, not my truth. This shame belongs to someone else. I don't have to carry it. The more you practice this discernment, the quieter the noise becomes, and beneath the noise, something extraordinary emerges, a voice that is not borrowed. It doesn't shout, it doesn't argue, it doesn't demand. It speaks softly, like a memory from before memory, the voice of awareness itself. It has no agenda, because it is not trying to prove anything. It has no fear, because it does not cling to identity. It simply witnesses. This voice is the closest thing you have to you. It existed before you learned language. It was present before anyone told you who to be. It has no shape, because it is the space in which shapes appear. It has no opinions, because it is the awareness in which opinions arise and dissolve. Learning to hear this voice is not easy. It requires patience. It requires silence. It requires the courage to let go of the comfort of familiar thoughts, even if they no longer serve you. It means sitting with the question, who would I be if I stopped believing everything I've been told about myself? You may find the answer disorienting. You may discover that much of what you called me was never yours to begin with. But you may also discover something deeper, a version of you that doesn't need validation, doesn't cling to labels, doesn't fear the unknown, a version that is not constructed from the outside in, but revealed from the inside out. And that is the paradox at the heart of self-awareness. To find out who you truly are, you must first unlearn who you were taught to be. To hear your voice, you must first silence the chorus. To see clearly from behind your eyes, you must first acknowledge how many others are still looking through them. Because the self is not an island, it is an echo, and when you trace that echo back to its source, you might realize that you is not a single voice at all, but the silence that listens to them all and remains untouched. Imagine for a moment that you stop trying. Not because you've given up, but because there's nothing left to prove. Imagine you stop striving to be intelligent, to be kind, to be worthy, to be loved. You stop rehearsing your identity, defending your opinions, polishing your story. You stop performing entirely. What would remain if all the effort fell away? The question unsettles most people, because so much of what we call self is built on effort. We spend our lives chasing a better version of ourselves, a smarter, stronger, calmer, more successful, more authentic version. We measure progress by how far we've come from who we used to be. We define worthiness by how much we've achieved, how much we've learned, how much we've improved. But beneath all that striving lies a deeper truth. A truth so simple that the mind almost refuses to see it. You existed before the striving began, and that existence, untouched by ambition, free from comparison, is you by default. This is the self that simply is. Not the self that becomes. Not the self that achieves. Not the self that is described or defined. Just the self that exists before you try to be anything at all. Most people never meet this version of themselves because they are too busy building another one. They believe identity is something they must construct, a collection of traits, roles, beliefs, and accomplishments assembled piece by piece until they resemble a complete person. But the more they build, the further they drift from what was already there. It's like painting layer upon layer on a canvas, believing you're creating art, while forgetting the blank space that made the painting possible in the first place. You by default is that blank space. It is the awareness that existed before language, before memory, before belief. It is the consciousness that was present the moment you opened your eyes for the first time, raw, wordless, unshaped. It has no opinions because opinions are learned. It has no labels because labels are given. It has no story because stories are written later. And yet, it is the most real, stable, and enduring part of you. The irony is that we fear this default self. We fear it because it feels like nothing, and the mind is terrified of nothing. The mind craves definition, substance, identity. It wants something to cling to, something to say, this is me. But the deeper you look, the more every label slips through your fingers. I am a teacher, until you retire. I am strong, until life humbles you. I am kind, until anger takes over. All the things you think you are temporary. They arise and dissolve with circumstance. Only the awareness beneath them remains unchanged. Think of it this way. The ocean takes on many forms, waves, currents, storms, but beneath the surface, it is still water. The surface changes constantly. The depth does not. The self you perform, the one shaped by effort, reaction, and expectation, is the surface. The self by default is the depth. You catch glimpses of this deeper self in rare, quiet moments, staring at a sunrise, forgetting yourself in music, losing track of time in a state of flow. In those moments, the inner monologue pauses. The striving stops. There's no narrative, no identity, no I, and yet you still exist. In fact, you feel more real in those moments than at any other time. That is because you are touching the self that exists before the story, the one that doesn't need to justify itself. But we resist living there. We rush back to our stories because they give us a sense of control. We say, I need to find myself, as if the self were missing, hiding somewhere in the future. But the self isn't missing. It's buried under the noise we keep adding to it. The search itself becomes the obstacle. You cannot find what you never lost. You can only stop obscuring it. And yet, this isn't an argument against growth. It's not about abandoning ambition or refusing to evolve. It's about realizing that growth is not about adding to yourself. It's about remembering yourself. The tree doesn't strive to be a tree. It simply grows into what it already is. And you too are not trying to become someone. You are unfolding into what has always been there. This understanding changes everything. It means you are not defined by what you do or fail to do. It means your worth is not conditional on success or approval. It means you can fail without being a failure, lose without being lost, and change without losing who you are. Because who you are, at the most fundamental level, is the awareness beneath it all. And once you glimpse that truth, the endless striving begins to soften. You stop trying so hard to be someone, and start resting in the fact that you are. You stop chasing happiness, and begin noticing the quiet joy that was always present beneath the noise. You stop clinging to identity as if it were fragile, and start seeing it for what it is. A mask you can wear lightly, change often and remove without fear. The you by default is not something to build, discover, or achieve. It is the stillness beneath the storm. It is the presence beneath the performance. It is the space in which every version of you arises and fades. And the most paradoxical truth of all, you don't need to become that self, because you already are. You always have been. Even now, beneath every thought you're thinking and every story you're telling, you by default is quietly watching, unchanged, unbroken, whole. Strip everything away, every label, every memory, every belief, every accomplishment. Remove the roles you play and the stories you tell. Forget your name, your past, your future. Who would remain if there was nothing left to describe you? Most people think the answer is no one, but that no one isn't a void. It's the empty outline, the silent, formless structure that gives shape to everything you think you are. The idea of an empty outline can feel unsettling. We are so used to defining ourselves by content, by what fills us, that we rarely stop to consider the space that holds it all. But just as the shape of a vase is defined not by its clay but by the emptiness inside it, so too is the self defined by the space that remains when all else is removed. That space is not nothingness. It's potential. It's the canvas beneath the painting, the silence beneath the music, the stage on which every act of your identity unfolds. We spend most of our lives distracted by the paint. We become obsessed with the details, the careers we build, the beliefs we defend, the personalities we perform. We pile more and more into the container of the self, believing that the more we add, the more real we become. But no matter how much we fill it, something always feels incomplete. There's always a corner, unpainted, a space unfilled, and that's because the essence of who we are is not in the paint. It's in the outline. Think of all the things that once defined you but no longer do. A childhood nickname, a job you once loved, a relationship you once believed was your entire world. All of them have faded. All of them have changed. And yet, something remains. That something is the outline, the quiet continuity beneath the shifting details. It has no features of its own, but without it, nothing else could exist. The problem is that emptiness terrifies us. We equate emptiness with absence, with insignificance, with death. We fear that if we strip everything away, nothing meaningful will remain. And so, we cling desperately to our stories, even when they limit us. We defend identities long after they've stopped serving us. We keep painting over the same canvas because we're terrified of what it might mean to leave it blank. But here's the paradox. Emptiness is not the opposite of fullness. It's the condition that makes fullness possible. The silence between words is what gives language meaning. The space between objects is what allows us to distinguish them. The emptiness inside a vessel is what makes it useful. Likewise, the empty outline of your identity is not a void. It's the frame within which life happens. You catch glimpses of this outline in moments when the details fall away, when you lose track of time watching the ocean, when you sit in silence and feel yourself simply existing, when a major life event, the end of a relationship, the loss of a job, strips you of the roles you've been playing, and for a brief, terrifying moment, you don't know who you are. That confusion isn't a sign of collapse, it's a glimpse of the outline, and though it feels disorienting, it's also the most honest encounter you can have with yourself. The outline is what remains when identity dissolves, and because it is formless, it is limitless. It's the space that allows for reinvention. It's the part of you that can hold any story, any belief, any possibility, without being defined by any of them. It's the blank page that never runs out of room. This is why people who experience profound loss often describe a strange sense of clarity. When everything they thought they were is taken away, they realize they are still here. Their jobs, relationships, possessions and ambitions may vanish, but something deeper, something wordless, remains. That is the outline. That is the self beneath the self. Learning to see the outline is one of the most powerful forms of self-awareness. It means recognizing that your worth does not depend on what fills you. It means you can change without losing who you are, fail without becoming a failure, evolve without erasing the past, because who you are is not the content of your life. It's the space that holds it. And yet, we resist this realization, because it threatens the illusion of control. We want to believe we are the authors of our identity, not the space in which it unfolds. We want substance, not structure. But structure is what allows substance to exist at all. So, try this. Instead of asking, "Who am I?" ask, "What remains when I am nothing?" Instead of defining yourself by what you've built, notice the space that allowed you to build it. Instead of clinging to the story, trace the outline that makes the story possible. You may discover that the emptiness you feared is not emptiness at all. It's peace. It's freedom. It's the infinite capacity to become anything, or nothing at all. And once you see this, identity stops being a trap. You can add details, erase them, change them as often as you like, and the outline will still hold. You stop confusing the paint for the canvas. You stop mistaking the mask for the actor. And you finally understand that who you are is not what you fill yourself with. It's the space that allows you to be filled in the first place. There's a quiet ache that hums beneath the surface of every human life. A subtle but persistent sense that something is missing. It doesn't matter how much you achieve, how much you own, or how deeply you love. The feeling returns, again and again, like an echo from somewhere deeper than thought. You feel it in the still moments before sleep, in the aftermath of triumph, in the spaces between distractions. It's the hollow you try to fill with purpose, possessions, relationships, and meaning. And no matter how much you pour into it, it never stays full. Most people spend their lives trying to fix this. They believe the emptiness is evidence of a flaw, a problem to solve. So they chase solutions. The next achievement, the next relationship, the next revelation that will finally make them feel whole. And for a fleeting moment, it works. Success brings satisfaction. Love brings warmth. Discovery brings wonder, but the feeling never lasts. The ache always returns. And so, they search again, certain that the next thing will be the one that finally fills the void for good. But what if the emptiness isn't a mistake? What if it isn't something to be filled, but something to be understood? What if that feeling of missing isn't a sign of something wrong with you, but a sign of what you are? The truth is, the emptiness is not a flaw. It's a feature. It's not a wound in the soul. It's the soul's shape. The cup is not defined by the clay around it, but by the empty space within it. That space is what makes it useful. Without it, it's not a cup at all, just a lump of earth. Likewise, The part of you that feels missing is not a defect. It's the space that makes you human. It's the part of you that allows growth, change, curiosity, and longing. Without it, you would be static, complete, but lifeless. This is why the search for fulfillment never ends. Because fulfillment is not meant to be permanent. The moment you fill the void completely, you stop expanding. The ache isn't there to torment you. It's there to propel you. It's the gravitational pull of possibility, the space in your soul reaching toward what could be. And yet, we misunderstand this, and try to conquer the void. We treat longing as something shameful, incompleteness as a failure. We believe that happiness means never wanting anything again. But the deepest joys of life come not from eliminating desire, but from dancing with it. From understanding that the emptiness itself is what gives meaning to everything you do. Think about how love works. It is powerful precisely because it never fully satisfies. The more you love, the deeper your capacity for love becomes. It's not a problem to be solved. It's a well that deepens the more you draw from it. Or think about knowledge. Every answer you find opens new questions. Every discovery expands the horizon of what you don't know. The emptiness doesn't shrink. It grows. And that's what keeps you alive, curious, evolving. The paradox, then, is that the void you're trying to fill is the very thing that keeps you searching, and the search itself is what makes life meaningful. Without it, there would be nothing to strive for, nothing to reach toward, nothing to wonder about. Completion is not the point. The point is to keep becoming. This doesn't mean the ache is always pleasant. Sometimes it's lonely, heavy, unbearable. It feels like something vital is missing. And in a way, something is. But that something is not a specific object or achievement. It's potential. It's the infinite range of what you could be, but are not yet. It's the gap between who you are and who you're still becoming. And once you recognize that, the relationship with emptiness changes. You stop trying to fill it with noise. You stop fearing it. You start listening to it. The ache becomes a teacher, pointing you toward what truly matters. The longing becomes a compass, guiding you toward growth. The space stops feeling like absence and starts feeling like invitation. There's another secret hidden in the emptiness. It never truly belongs to you. It connects you to everything else. The hunger that drives you is the same hunger that drives stars to form, rivers to carve valleys, seeds to split open and grow. The universe itself is defined by space, vast, empty stretches that make the dance of matter possible. That same principle lives inside you. The emptiness isn't a personal flaw. It's a reflection of reality itself. So maybe the question isn't, how do I fill what's missing? Maybe the question is, what is this space asking me to create? Maybe the ache isn't calling you to complete yourself. Maybe it's calling you to expand yourself. And if you stop fearing the void, you might realize it's not a bottomless hole after all. It's a horizon. No matter how far you walk, there will always be more to explore. No matter how much you learn, there will always be more to know. No matter how deeply you love, there will always be deeper ways to love still. And that's not a tragedy. It's the essence of being alive. The ache will always be there. It's not something to cure. It's something to carry. And when you stop resenting it, it transforms. It becomes a pulse, a movement, a quiet invitation to grow into the next version of yourself. The missing piece you've been searching for was never meant to be found. It was meant to lead you forward. What if everything you think you are is only half the story? What if the you present to the world, the personality you've built, the beliefs you defend, the values you uphold, is meaningful only because of the things you're not? Every identity casts a shadow, and that shadow is its inverse, the hidden, often ignored opposite that gives it shape. Without it, you would dissolve into nothing. Think of the simplest opposites. Light has no meaning without darkness. Strength means nothing without weakness. Order would be invisible without chaos. These contrasts are not enemies. They are co-defining pairs, and your identity is built the same way. You are kind because you know cruelty exists. You see yourself as brave because fear is always nearby. You strive to be good because you are aware of the potential for evil both in the world and within yourself. This is the paradox we rarely confront. We define ourselves not just by what we embrace, but by what we reject. In fact, rejection is often the first act of identity. From an early age, we learn to say, "I'm not like them." We define who we are by who we distance ourselves from, by what we believe we're better than, different from, above, and over time, those rejections become part of our self-image. They become invisible boundaries that tell us where I ends and not I begins. But those boundaries are illusions. The more fiercely you define yourself against something, the more you become dependent on it. The pacifist needs the warrior to make sense of their pacifism. The saint needs the sinner to give meaning to their virtue. Even the rebel, who claims to stand apart from the system, is defined entirely by the system they oppose. Without its presence, their identity collapses. And here's the deeper, more uncomfortable truth. Your inverse isn't always out there. It's inside you too. Everything you reject about the world, greed, cruelty, selfishness, cowardice, lives somewhere within you as potential. You suppress it, deny it, bury it beneath layers of morality and ego, but it's there, and whether you like it or not, it shapes you. This isn't a moral failing. It's a structural reality. The self cannot exist without its inverse, just as a shape cannot exist without empty space around it. The problem arises when you deny this relationship, when you convince yourself that the shadow isn't part of you, because the more you deny it, the more power it gains. The traits you repress don't disappear. They leak out in unconscious ways. They distort your choices. They show up as projection. The qualities you hate most in others often reflect the ones you've exiled in yourself. But what happens if you turn toward the inverse instead of running from it? What happens if you acknowledge that it's part of the same whole? You begin to see yourself more clearly. You realize that kindness isn't the absence of cruelty. It's the choice not to act on it. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to move forward despite it. Morality isn't purity. It's the ongoing negotiation with darker impulses that never fully disappear. Embracing your inverse doesn't mean acting on every dark urge or abandoning your principles. It means understanding that your humanity is bigger than the narrow band of traits you label me. It means realizing that the line between self and shadow isn't a wall, it's a mirror. When you begin to see this, your judgments soften, not just toward yourself, but toward others. You stop seeing bad people and start seeing people wrestling with their own inverses. You stop drawing hard lines between us and them, and start recognizing that the potential for both light and darkness exists in everyone, including you, and that realization brings humility. It reminds you that goodness is not an inherent quality but a daily practice. It reminds you that identity is not a fixed state but a balance. There's freedom here too. When you accept your inverse, you stop being defined by the need to run from it. You stop defining yourself solely by opposition. You stop building your worth around being better than something else. You discover that you are more than the sum of your preferences, your labels, your rejections. You are the entire spectrum, the full range of what's possible. This is the deeper meaning of the old philosophical idea that every virtue is a vice in disguise. What you call generosity might, in another context, be avoidance. What you call honesty might, in another context, be cruelty. What you call strength might, in another context, be fear. Every quality you prize contains its opposite, and to truly understand yourself, you must be willing to see both. The self isn't a straight line. It's a pendulum, swinging back and forth between opposites, carving meaning out of motion, and the moment you try to freeze it, to define yourself as this and not that, you lose sight of the whole. So the next time you say, I am, pause, and ask yourself, what am I not? And then look closer. The answer you find there, in the shadow, in the inverse, in the uncomfortable mirror, might tell you more about who you are than the answer you began with. Because you are not just the light you've chosen, you are also the darkness you've denied. You are not just the self you've built, you are also the self you've hidden. And until you can hold both in the same hand, your identity will always be half a story. For most of your life, you've been told to figure out who you are. The world demands it, on forms, in conversations, in your own restless thoughts. You search for labels: student, artist, parent, leader. You collect adjectives: strong, kind, ambitious, patient. You tell stories: I'm the kind of person who... But beneath that search lies a rarely examined assumption that the essence of you can be discovered by adding more layers, more traits, more roles, more definitions. And yet, the deeper truth is this: you might understand yourself more clearly by subtracting instead of adding, by looking not at what you are, but at what you are not. It's a strange exercise at first. Start removing the obvious. You are not your name. That was given to you. You are not your job. That can change. You are not your beliefs. They evolve. You are not your thoughts. They come and go. Even your personality, which feels so fundamental, is not fixed. Under different conditions, in a different culture, with a different history, you would act and think differently. So if all of these things can shift, how can they possibly define you? The more you peel away, the more elusive the self becomes. And yet, paradoxically, the less you are, the closer you come to what you truly are. Like a sculptor removing marble to reveal a statue, you discover shape by carving away excess. Identity is not built by accumulation, it's uncovered through negation. This idea isn't new. Mystics across traditions have spoken of the via negativa, the path of knowing by unknowing. Philosophers have described the self as a boundary, a container, a space defined by what it excludes. Even science, in its own way, supports this. The brain doesn't define objects by their essence but by contrast, by distinguishing them from what they are not. In other words, you come into focus, not by what you contain, but by the edges where you end. This perspective shifts everything. Instead of obsessing over how to define yourself, you start noticing how much of you is simply borrowed. The opinions you cling to, they're echoes of conversations you've had, the fears that hold you back. They're inherited from people who feared before you. The ambitions that drive you, they're often responses to societal expectations. And if you strip all of that away, even temporarily, what remains? It's unsettling because what remains feels like nothing. And yet, that nothing is not absence. It's awareness. It's the observer that remains when the stories collapse. It's the stillness beneath the swirl of thought. It's the I that doesn't need a predicate. This is where the paradox deepens. The more you define yourself, the more confined you become. Every label is a wall. Every I am is a limitation. I am an introvert narrows the range of your behavior. I am a realist blinds you to wonder. I am broken locks you in pain. The ego clings to these definitions because they offer certainty. But certainty is a cage. Freedom lies in the opposite direction, in the willingness to remain undefined. Consider this. A blank page can become anything. Once words are written on it, its potential narrows. The same is true for you. The moment you say I am X, you exclude the infinite other possibilities you might be. But if you can resist the urge to define, even for a moment, you begin to feel the vastness of what you could be. And that vastness is closer to your true nature than any single definition. This doesn't mean you must reject all identity, or live without a sense of self. Identity has a purpose. It's a useful tool, a map for navigating the world. But it's not the territory. The danger is in mistaking the map for reality, the description for the thing itself. When you realize that you are not the sum of your labels, you gain the freedom to pick them up and put them down as needed, without mistaking any of them for your essence. It's also worth noticing that the things you define yourself against are often just as revealing. You say, I'm not selfish, but who would you be if selfishness weren't an option? You say, I'm not like them, but without them, what would you mean? Much of your identity is relational, a reaction to something else. It's a dance, not a solitary state. And so, the most profound act of self-knowledge is not to list what you are, but to watch what falls away when you stop holding on. When you do, you begin to see that you is not a static object to be found. It's an open field of potential. It's not a noun but a verb. It's not a box of traits, but the capacity to contain them, and to let them go. This realization can feel disorienting at first, like losing solid ground, but soon that groundlessness becomes freedom. You no longer need to defend an identity. You no longer need to prove you are someone. You can simply be fluid, changing, undefined. You can embody roles and release them. You can hold beliefs and outgrow them. You can exist without needing to explain why. And maybe, in the end, this is the greatest truth of all. You are not what you are. You are the space that allows what you are to come and go. You are the silence beneath the song, the emptiness within the vessel, the sky that holds every passing cloud. And in that space, wide, boundless, unburdened by definition, you might find the most authentic version of yourself you'll ever know. Every time you stand before a mirror, you assume it's showing you the truth, a neutral, accurate reflection of reality. But look closer. The mirror isn't passive. It doesn't simply show you who you are, it shapes what you see. And the same is true of the mental mirror through which you perceive yourself. Your thoughts, your judgments, your self-image, they're not just reflections, they're interpretations. They don't just show reality, they create it. This is one of the great paradoxes of consciousness. The mind is both observer and architect. It claims to reveal the truth while quietly building it behind the scenes. It says, "This is who I am," while deciding who that I will be. And once you believe the reflection, it becomes difficult, almost impossible, to tell where the mirror ends and the self begins. Think about how memory works. You recall a past event and assume you're replaying it as it happened, but you're not. Memory is not a photograph. It's a story your mind reconstructs, alters, and edits each time you remember it. And that story isn't shaped only by facts. It's shaped by how you feel now, by what you believe now, by who you think you are now. The past you remember isn't the past that happened. It's the past your present self needs to remember. The same distortion happens in the mirror of self-reflection. You believe you're looking at yourself objectively. Strengths, flaws, history, desires. But everything you see is filtered through layers of expectation, bias, and narrative. If you think of yourself as unworthy, you'll interpret every failure as proof. If you believe you're destined for greatness, you'll twist even mistakes into evidence of progress. In both cases, the mirror isn't just showing you who you are, it's telling you who to be. This feedback loop is powerful. The stories you tell about yourself become the lens through which you interpret experience, and those interpretations reinforce the story. It's a self-sustaining system, like a mirror facing another mirror, reflecting reflections into infinity. This is why people cling so fiercely to their self-concepts. It's not just that they believe them, it's that those beliefs actively construct their reality. Consider the classic psychological concept of the self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe you're bad at relationships, you may approach them with fear and hesitation. That fear affects how you behave, which affects how others respond, which produces results that confirm your original belief. See, the mirror says, "I told you so," and once the reflection feels real, it's almost impossible to imagine a different version of yourself. But here's the catch. The mirror isn't lying maliciously, it's just doing what mirrors do, reflecting what's in front of them. The problem is that the mind confuses the reflection for the reality. It forgets that the image it sees is not the thing itself. The mirror doesn't know you, it only knows what you show it. This is why shifting your self-image can be so transformative. It's not that affirmations or reframing magically change who you are, it's that they alter the shape of the mirror. And when the mirror changes, the reflection changes. And when the reflection changes, so does the self. But this also means that knowing yourself, the sacred goal of philosophy and psychology alike, is far trickier than it sounds. Because the more you stare into the mirror, the more you risk mistaking your own reflection for the truth. The more you analyze your thoughts, the more those thoughts shape what you see. The act of observation itself changes the observed. This is not a flaw. It's a feature of consciousness. It's why we grow. It's why we evolve. The mirror doesn't just reflect who we are. It participates in who we become. Every time you imagine a better version of yourself, you place that image in the mirror. And if you believe it deeply enough, you start moving toward it. Likewise, every time you define yourself by your limitations, you carve those limitations into the reflection, and the mirror obliges. The great challenge, then, is not to stop the mirror from thinking. You can't. The challenge is to remember that it's thinking with you, that the reflection is not reality. It's a version of reality you are actively shaping. Once you understand this, the mirror stops being a dictator and becomes a collaborator. It stops telling you who you are and starts showing you who you could be. This awareness is liberating because it dissolves the illusion of permanence. It reminds you that the you see is not fixed. It's fluid, changeable, responsive. It means you can rewrite your story, redraw your reflection, rethink who you are. It means the self isn't something to discover but something to create. But it's also humbling, because if the mirror thinks, it also misleads. It shows you what you want to see, or what you fear most. It amplifies your insecurities and exaggerates your strengths. It's biased, selective, incomplete. The reflection is useful, but it's never the whole truth. And if you want to see beyond it, you have to look past the surface, into the awareness that sees the mirror itself. Because beyond the reflection, beyond the stories, beyond the looping feedback of thought, there is something that doesn't change, something that doesn't need the mirror to know it exists. That something silent, unshaped, unreflected, is the part of you the mirror can't touch. And in the end, that may be the only part that's truly real. Every idea you have about yourself lives inside a pair of opposites. You call yourself good, only because bad exists. You strive to be strong because weakness is always possible. Even your deepest desires, for love, freedom, meaning, exist only because you felt their absence. Identity doesn't exist in isolation, it exists in contrast. And this means that whether you realize it or not, you are trapped inside a system of dualities. This isn't just a philosophical curiosity, it's the structure of your everyday thinking. The mind organizes the world into binaries, because that's how it makes sense of things: hot and cold, light and dark, self and other, life and death. And once the mind divides reality into these categories, everything, including you, becomes defined by where it stands on the spectrum. You are not simply yourself, you are the midpoint between everything you are and everything you are not. At first, this seems harmless, even helpful. Opposites give us direction. They tell us what to strive for and what to avoid, but they also trap us in an endless cycle, because as soon as you identify with one side, the other side doesn't disappear, it becomes your shadow. If you decide you must always be successful, failure lurks behind every decision. If you cling to being happy, sadness becomes your enemy. If you define yourself by freedom, you begin to fear every form of dependence. In trying to live as one thing, you become enslaved to its opposite. This is why so much human suffering is self-inflicted. We spend our lives chasing one side of a duality and fleeing from the other, and in doing so, we give both sides power over us. You're terrified of being weak, so you overcompensate with strength, and yet the fear of weakness never goes away. You long to be loved, so you shape your behavior to win affection, and yet the possibility of rejection haunts you. The more you cling to one pole, the more tightly you are bound to the other. This psychological trap is everywhere. It's in the pursuit of self-esteem, which depends on avoiding shame. It's in the quest for success, which gains meaning only in relation to failure. It's in our definitions of morality, identity, even consciousness itself. Every yes depends on a no, every I depends on a not I, and no matter how hard you try, you can't have one without the other. The great teachers of philosophy and spirituality understood this long before psychology gave it a name. They spoke of non-duality, a state of awareness that sees beyond the pairs of opposites. Lao Tzu called it the Tao, the balance beyond good and evil, being and non-being. The Buddha called it the middle way, a space where craving and aversion dissolve. Even Hegel described identity as a dialectical process, a thesis and its antithesis merging into something higher. All these teachings point to the same truth. You cannot free yourself from opposites by clinging to one side. You transcend them only by seeing the illusion of the division itself. What does this mean in practice? It means noticing how often your choices are defined by their opposites. It means watching how fear of not being enough drives your pursuit of success, how fear of loneliness fuels your search for love, how fear of insignificance shapes your ambition. And when you notice it, it means asking a deeper question. What would happen if I stopped resisting the opposite? This is not easy. Your entire life, you've been taught to seek one and avoid the other. But paradoxically, the moment you stop resisting, the grip loosens. When you stop fearing weakness, strength stops being a performance. When you stop fighting sadness, happiness stops being a prize. When you stop clinging to self, the line between self and other begins to blur, and with it, the constant anxiety of defending who you are. The irony is that opposites don't actually exist separately. They define each other. They give birth to each other. Without darkness, light has no meaning. Without sorrow, joy has no texture. Without death, life loses its urgency. And without not you, the idea of you has no shape. The more deeply you see this, the more the tension begins to dissolve. You realize that good and bad, success and failure, self and other, are not enemies but partners in a larger dance. It's a shift from either-or thinking to both and awareness. You are not either strong or weak. You are both, in different moments, in different ways. You are not either good or flawed. You are both, woven together. And when you accept this, something extraordinary happens. The need to prove yourself disappears. The fear of falling apart fades. You stop oscillating between extremes and start inhabiting the vast space that holds them both. This space, beyond opposites, beyond definitions, is where peace lives. It's not the peace of perfection, but the peace of wholeness. It's the still point at the center of the pendulum, the eye of the storm, the silence beneath the noise. It's the place where the self stops being a position and becomes a perspective, a vantage point that sees all opposites as two sides of the same whole. And once you experience that space, even briefly, the game changes. You still feel joy and sorrow, success and failure, love and loss, but you're no longer defined or imprisoned by them. They are waves on the surface of the ocean, not boundaries of your being. You realize that the self isn't a label pinned to one side of a polarity. It's the awareness that holds the polarity itself. And perhaps, in the end, that's the true escape from the trap, not to destroy the opposites or choose the right one, but to see that you were never just one side to begin with. You were always the field in which both sides rise and fall, the consciousness vast enough to hold contradiction without needing resolution. You spend your whole life trying to understand the world, its rules, its patterns, its truths. You study its history, interpret its meanings, chase its hidden order. But beneath all this seeking, there's an unspoken assumption that the world is something you can grasp, something that exists fully as it appears. Yet the deeper you look, the stranger it becomes. The closer you get to what the world is, the more you realize that understanding often comes not from what the world is, but from what it isn't. At first this seems like a contradiction. How can absence reveal presence? How can the negation of reality bring you closer to truth? But think about how we learn anything. We define light by the absence of darkness, silence by the absence of sound, peace by the absence of conflict. In the same way, we often come to understand the world not by describing it, but by peeling away the layers of illusion that disguise what it is not. Most of what you believe about the world is not reality. It's interpretation. You see patterns where none exist. You project intentions onto randomness. You build narratives out of coincidence. The human brain evolved to find meaning, even where there is none, because meaning is comforting. It makes a chaotic universe feel personal. But this constant search for meaning can become a prison. It convinces you that the world must always mean something, and when it doesn't, you panic. What if the world isn't here to make sense? What if it isn't a story unfolding according to some hidden purpose? What if it isn't a puzzle to be solved, or a lesson to be learned, or a test to be passed? What if the world simply is vast, indifferent, mysterious, and all your explanations are just human fingerprints on something far too big to grasp? This idea can feel terrifying. We crave certainty. We want the world to have reasons, causes, intentions. But when you strip those expectations away, something remarkable happens. The world doesn't shrink. It expands. It becomes bigger, stranger, freer. The absence of meaning doesn't make life empty. It makes it infinite. Take time, for example. We treat it as a straight line, past, present, future. But physics tells us it may not flow at all. It might be a dimension we move through, or an illusion created by memory. Space, too, resists definition. We call it empty, yet it teems with energy. Virtual particles blinking in and out of existence. Even the solid matter around you is mostly empty space. The deeper we look, the more the universe resists our categories. What it isn't becomes clearer than what it is. And this isn't just true of the physical world, it's true of the human one too. Society teaches you what the world should be: fair, just, logical, predictable, but reality refuses to conform. It isn't fair, it isn't logical, it isn't predictable, and while that may seem bleak, it's also liberating. Because the moment you stop demanding that the world be something it's not, you can finally see it for what it is. This shift in perspective transforms the way you live. When you stop expecting fairness, you become grateful for moments of grace. When you stop expecting permanence, you savor what is fleeting. When you stop demanding order, you learn to dance with chaos. When you stop insisting that life deliver meaning, you discover that meaning is something you create, not something you're handed. This is the paradox of negation. The more you understand what the world isn't, the more clearly you see what it is. It's not a moral system, but it contains beauty and cruelty side by side. It's not a narrative, but it's full of stories. It's not designed for you, but you can shape a life within it. It doesn't care about your existence, and yet that very indifference gives you the freedom to define your own purpose. Understanding what the world isn't also changes how you see yourself. You are not the center of the universe. You are not separate from nature. You are not guaranteed anything, not justice, not love, not tomorrow, and far from diminishing you. This knowledge can make you more humble, more compassionate, more alive. It strips away the illusions that keep you trapped in entitlement or resentment and leaves behind a deeper gratitude for the sheer improbability of being here at all. This awareness can even dissolve fear. Death terrifies us because we imagine it as something unnatural, something that interrupts our story. But the truth is, the world isn't a story. It isn't a narrative with a beginning and an end. Life and death are not opposites. They are partners. Existence includes non-existence. And when you stop resisting that truth, the fear begins to lose its grip. What the world isn't will never be fully knowable, because every time you strip away one illusion, another lies beneath it. But each illusion you shed brings you closer to a clearer, quieter understanding. You stop shouting, "Why is it like this?" and start whispering, "This is how it is." And in that whisper, there's peace. The world isn't here to explain itself. It isn't obligated to satisfy your curiosity or align with your values. It isn't required to make sense. But in its refusal to do so, it offers you something even greater, the chance to experience it directly, without filters, without demands, without illusions. Not as a story, not as a problem, but as a mystery, vast, indifferent, and infinitely alive. Stand still long enough, and something strange begins to happen. The edges of who you are, the boundaries you've spent a lifetime defending, start to blur. The beliefs you were so sure of lose their sharpness. The roles you've played dissolve like smoke. Even the I at the center of your thoughts, the one narrating this story, begins to fade. And as you watch yourself disappear, a profound realization dawns. Maybe the point of all this was never to define yourself, but to vanish. In art, a vanishing point is where parallel lines converge, where distance collapses into a single invisible spot. It's the place where the eye stops seeing form and starts perceiving depth. And that's exactly what happens to the self when you follow it far enough. All the contradictions, opposites, illusions, and identities you've explored eventually meet at a point beyond definition. A point where you stops being a thing and becomes something more subtle, more expansive, more real. This isn't annihilation. It's revelation. The vanishing point doesn't erase the painting. It gives it dimension. Likewise, the dissolution of the self doesn't destroy you. It reveals the space in which you've always existed. The disappearance is not a loss but a return, a falling away of everything false so that what is timeless can emerge. You've spent this journey exploring the reflections that shape you, the voices behind your eyes, the roles you play by default, the empty outline beneath your identity. You've seen how the void you try to fill is not a flaw but the shape of possibility itself. You've met the inverse that defines you, the opposites that trap you, the illusions that tell you what the world is not. And now, at the end of that path, the question remains, who are you when there is nothing left to reflect? Look closely, and you'll see that even the question itself begins to dissolve, because you, the seeker, the knower, the thinker, was always part of the illusion. The self that wants answers is itself the greatest unanswered question, and the deeper you look for it, the more it retreats. Like chasing the horizon, you can run forever and never arrive, because the self isn't meant to be found, it's meant to be seen through. The vanishing point is not an end, but a perspective shift. It's what happens when the mirror turns back on itself and realizes it was never reflecting anything real. It's the moment you stop asking, "Who am I?" and start experiencing what it means to simply be. No labels, no opposites, no stories, just awareness. Silent, infinite, unconditioned. From this space, everything looks different. The world that once seemed solid and separate reveals itself as fluid and connected. The line between self and other dissolves. Even the boundaries of time and identity soften. You are no longer a fixed point observing reality. You are the field in which reality unfolds. And paradoxically, in losing yourself, you become everything. This perspective doesn't erase your humanity. You still feel joy and sorrow, love and fear. You still build relationships, chase dreams, make mistakes. But you engage with them differently. You wear identities lightly, knowing they are masks. You move through opposites gracefully, knowing they are pairs. You embrace uncertainty with curiosity, knowing that not knowing is closer to truth than any answer ever could be. And perhaps most importantly, you stop fearing disappearance. Death no longer looms as a terrifying void, because you've already tasted what it means to vanish. You've already seen that beneath the story of you lies something vast and unbreakable, something that doesn't begin or end, win or lose, arrive or depart. Something that has always been here, watching, aware, untouched by the rise and fall of the reflection. This is the final paradox. In trying to know who you are, you eventually discover that there is no fixed you to know. There is only the ever-changing play of identity and the stillness beneath it. There is only the mirror and the awareness that holds the mirror. There is only the vanishing point and the infinite depth it reveals. And once you see this clearly, you stop clinging to the idea of self as something fragile that must be protected. You stop building walls around your identity. You stop searching for meaning as if it were hidden somewhere outside you. Instead, you rest, not in answers, but in awareness. Not in form, but in the space that allows all forms to arise and dissolve. And so the journey ends where it began, with a question that cannot be answered. But now, that question feels different. It's no longer a riddle to solve. It's an invitation, a doorway into the infinite. What if you were never meant to be found at all? What if you were only ever meant to disappear? Because maybe in the end, that's the truest reflection of all. Not the image in the mirror, not the story in your mind, but the silent, boundless awareness left behind when the reflection fades. And if you can sit in that silence, even for a moment, you'll realize you were never missing anything. You were the vanishing point all along.